Good evening, everybody present here. Department of English and Research Center, Sri Parashakti College for Women, Kutralam, welcomes you all to the one-week international webinar series on women, gender, literature, core concepts, and perspectives. Before going to today's session, I would like to give few general instructions to the participants. Participants, once you enter the Zoom platform, kindly mute your audio and video. Kindly cooperate with us to maintain the bandwidth and avoid the network issues. You're requested to join the Zoom platform by connecting to the audio so that you can listen to the audio clearly. Entry to the Zoom platform will be allowed for 500 participants. Beyond that, other participants can view the sessions through the YouTube link. YouTube link will be provided only on the request basis because we can accommodate 500 participants in the Zoom platform itself. Attendance link and feedback link will be posted at 8:15 p.m. Since today is the last day of our webinar series, we will have two links. One is the day link, day 7 link will be posted after 8:15 p.m. And after the sessions are over, we will give you an overall link. And it is mandatory to fill the overall link also. And we request the participants not to post any kind of personal details like your mail ID or phone number in the chat box. Kindly please use the chat box only for recording your observations, putting your feedbacks, and posting your questions. Thank you for listening. We will move on to the today's session. Today, we have an eminent resource person with us, Dr.G.Banumadhi, Assistant Professor of English, Thiagarajar College, Madurai. So I would like to give a few words of introduction to her. She is a teacher a dedicated teacher of 19 years experience, and under her guidance, there are so many scholars that have pursued their MPhil and PhD degree. So she has submitted so much of projects and namely minor research project, Diasporic Dilemma in Chitra Banerjee Divakarni's Arranged Marriage and the Unknown Errors of Her Lives. She has organized so many workshops, seminars, and conferences. And she has been external committee members and examiner for various institutions. And she has been university nominee for the 3 reputed institutions. So if you look at her publications, we have a long list of publications that could see what kind of contributions she has given to the research. And with that short note, I would like to welcome Dr. Banumadhi ma'am to this webinar series. I welcome ma'am. I wish you to take over the session.
Thank you, Karthika. Good evening, everyone. It's very happy to meet you all on this virtual platform. You had been listening to a series of lectures exclusively on women all this week. And my topic is going to be like an add-on to what you have listened all this week. It is something I'm going to take you into a journey into the wilderness, some ideologies, some feminist ideologies, a few feminist ideologies. I have chosen a few feminists, and some interesting facts related to their theories, ideologies, and practitioners. And it is like an assorted. It is people whom interested me, certain interesting facts and factors. I have chosen them. It is at it is no not nothing anything else on the choice of the feminist. It is like at random. 1 minute. Let me start my PPT. Yes. So Hmm? Yes, feminist ideologies in the wilderness. Um, you have been listening to a lot of ideologies, but in the beginning, see how Sophocles had spoken about women. Silence gives the proper grace to women. This is how women had been all these years. Silence is what was expected of them, and they rarely expressed what they felt. And slowly and slowly, we have women expressing in the forms of different genres, and their expression were not only about all this poetry, prose, and other things, but seriously they started to express themselves regarding their criticism too, what they thought about the works, how they were focused, how literature has been also one of the institution. Studies, academics have also been one of the institution which has been a mode of suppression, and which had been a mode of patriarchal to establish patriarchal ideology. So, in this context, feminist thought always has resisted categorization, and feminist thinking nowadays it has been interdisciplinary, it has been intersectional and interlocking. So, all these terms and terminologies, I'll explain it as the slide moves on, as a lecture, as I go on in my lecture. And recent works of feminism have begun to see how concepts like self or individual are themselves constructed within institutions, because institutions such as family, society, religion, academical institutions, all these things establish orderliness and rules, sameness, and feminism questions whether that orderliness and sameness has been at the expense of the difference represented by women. So all this orderliness, is it good, or is it something where at the expense of the difference represented by women? Now, with this feminist literary criticism, it has been a challenge, and it is questioning the most basic institution of literary studies. Now, how we evaluate literature in almost all this feminist thoughts and feminist literary criticism, they try to examine how literature is evaluated and how we constitute knowledge about it, and how its study is determined by the structure of the academy, how this feminist literature or any literature for that matter, and how it is separated from other disciplines. So with these ideologies, with these ideas in mind, out of the later concern, how it is separated from other disciplines was born a whole new integrated field of inquiry, women's studies. Only when we have women's studies, as we have it separately, we have nowadays, we have women's studies department, we have women's studies as a subject in almost all institutions, so that we could examine how literature written on women, by women, and for women, how it is, how it builds this, how it tries to disrupt patriarchal ideologies, or how it builds patriarchal ideologies. All this study examines, if at all, if even in your own syllabus that is prescribed for you, or which you prescribe for students, you have to notice, starting from almost in every curriculum, you have British literature, you have modern literature. You can note how many are women, how many have been written by women writers, and how many are included, how many women writers are included in such studies, and how they had been sidelined. Only exclusively in this women's studies paper, we focus on ideologies about women, and the feminist ideologies or theories by women, and how other how the genres they how the other genres, how they make an impact or an effect on women. Now, starting with Virginia Woolf, let us journey into the wilderness. And I start with Virginia Woolf for a purpose. And as you know, she has been called the pioneer for feminism, even though without knowing, she herself did not have an agenda in her mind to work for feminism. But her essay called A Room of One's Own It is nearly 100 years, 1929. So it depicts how a female should approach her own stories as such there. And she's creating the fictional Shakespeare sister. And the famous dictum, a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And the interesting factor, what I noticed is her imagination of outsiders society, where women writers would create a virtual private space for themselves via the writings to develop a feminist critique of society. So a detailed study, critique is a detailed study of society. So women writers should create a virtual private space. It was her fantasy. Of course, it has become true. And the virtual space where via our writing, through our writing, we could create a space for ourselves. And she was the first woman who created this individualization in female population. And through her literature was, she was the first to create a literature for women in the feminist sense and to explore the psychological aspect of human weaknesses. And through her own stories, in particular by describing the nature of women. And she is raising this question. Do you know you are the most discussed animal in the universe in Virginia Woolf in a room of one's own? Because until 19th century, women had no opinions and no education. So she wanted to push women to react for this. Of course, the repression was really strong in those years, but the new motivation of Virginia Woolf is every woman had to be independent. So independent to write a book, independent to do sport, independent to smoke and work like men. And in our later book length essay, Three Guineas, she wrote about, written on the heels of World War II. So a man is asking about how war could be prevented. Of course, she's talking about the pacifism, but she's also drawing the fact as a woman, her political ideas aren't valued. First of all, in a room of one's own, she makes it very clear that women's voices are not heard, women's voices are not recorded. So in the larger scale, in the broader world, political ideas of women aren't valued at all. That is the point she records in Three Guineas. So now Virginia Woolf had been the pioneer of feminism, and she influenced a lot of other thinkers, and Simone de Beauvoir is one. And her Bible, they used to say, where she is discussing about gives a lot of detail regarding women's and how it has conformed for sex. And Shane,
Uh,
hello.
Ma'am, your voice is cracking. I think some audio problem. Can you just check it?
Okay, okay. I'll see into that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, Karthika, is it audible now?
Yes, ma'am. It's clear now, ma'am.
Hello?
Yes, yes, ma'am. It's clear.
Okay. Okay. Okay, Karthika. So in the second section, she claims that desire to feel that one's existence. So how do men and women justify their existence? It also this justification affects women differently than men, because Women are expected to justify their existence by loving others, only by fulfilling the needs of others in the family or in the society, fulfilling the expectations of others around them. Women justify their existence. And she argued that becoming a woman was difficult in decisive ways. So, you know the famous dictum, one is not born a woman, but she becomes one. She is made one by the sociological aspects because of history,
Ma'am,
literature,
excuse me.
psychoanalysis, and
Ma'am, your
biology.
PPT is not
It
shared.
presented women with yes, sir, Karth.
PPT is not shared, ma'am.
PPT is not shared.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir, Karthika. 1 minute.
Okay.
Is it
Yes,
clear
ma'am.
now, Karthika?
It's
Hello?
visible, ma'am. Visible.
Okay, okay. Okay, okay. So now, so she argued how women, how it became, how all these factors, history, literature, psychoanalysis and biology, presented women with incompatible myths. The myths, it was the myths which were confining them, and instead of encouraging them to become free, fallible and fully human, these myths really constrained, laid restrictions on women, and they had to abide by these myths as such. They. So in 1949, Simone de Beauvoir, her critics described her as anti-women and as she was against anti-marriage there. But although she thought economic work helped the women, but that work alone did not make women free and not but at the same time she did not devalue marriage and motherhood. They were not without value, they had their own value, but at the same time career alone did not make women free. And this second sex, the goal of the second sex was to help women cultivate a confidence in their own vision of the world, to recognize the value of their own freedom, that she later called rapport a soy, self-rapport. So now she wants women to recognize their own freedom, and because women couldn't live up to all the incompatible myths of femininity, they often felt like failures. So women feel as if they are failures because they don't fit into this myths created. And instead of asking themselves what they wanted for their lives, they berated themselves for not being what others wanted. So they always wanted to fit in the role models, the stereotypes that were created for them. And if at all, if they did not fit, they felt like failures. And so her manifesto, feminist manifesto to the second sex, is different compared to her novels. So she's not only a feminist theorist as such there, but she is also a novelist. But her novels were often criticized for having female characters who did not live up to her feminist ideals. So this was something which really surprised people, and for that she answered. After cataloguing stifling stereotypes of women, she did not want to furnish new galleries with oppressive mythical portraits. So she did not want to write strong women too, because it will once again reinforce women's feelings of division and inadequacy. So in a period when possibilities for women's lives were differently constrained than they are today, she wanted her reader to be able to dream, fail and dream again, always in the knowledge that failing didn't make them a failure. So this was her agenda too. For women's lives, she wanted her, that is, failure is not the end all. So you have to fail, dream again, come back, and you have to keep on striving. So this was a message that she wanted to give to women. So after Simone de Beauvoir, we move on to Betty Friedan, the American feminist, so whose book, The Feminine Mystic, created a social revolution, and she broke new grounds exploring the idea of women's personal fulfillment outside of their traditional roles. So she also helped advance the women's rights movement as one of the founders of National Organization for Women. She created that movement, and this book, The Feminine Mystic, It became a sensation, creating a social revolution by dispelling the myth that all women wanted to be happy homemakers. So she was a journalist, and she was asked to study about the role of the lot of homemakers. So where she comes across the disillusionment, comes across a lack of happiness in them. Of course, all the media and advertisements focus, and they all projected that middle class women were very happy homemakers. They had everything. They had all the electronic gadgets at home. They had all the devices to help them in their household chores. A happy family, the husband going to work, the children going to school, and they had a, a wonderful home. But in spite of all these things, women, they felt bored, and women lacked some happiness. So she tried to find out what was the reason. Then she understood that after all this speak or all the conversation with them, she found out that she wrote about the confining gender stereotypes and pushing women to have a. She found out that they could not fulfill their own personal needs. They fulfill their own personal wishes there, which ones, even their own hobbies, for example, painting or arts or writing, whatever they were pursuing before marriage, they had to stop and they had to fit into to the happy homemakers, caretakers. So this was what she brought out, and she so this her book was pushing for women to have a greater role in the political process too. So she founded this national organization for women, and she also fought for abortion rights. So it was the second wave of feminism for the reproductive rights, because we have to understand. So women 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago, it was their role was reproduction. So giving birth to children continuously, and always being a homemaker and caretaker, and not into the world, not looking into the world there. That was one aspect which confined them, and they were always into that. Now this fighting for the reproductive rights was also one of the point in her agenda, and by establishing National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws in 1969, she took the feminist movement into the next step there. So additionally, along with her, we have the leading feminists such as Gloria Steinem and Bella Asbeck, who helped create the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. Now, in this, the problem that has no name. So, as I said, this women, they found out that something was disturbing them, and Friedan were immature. She says that, I think this is a crisis of a turning point from an immaturity that has been there to full human identity. So they were so confined, they were so caught up in the traditional roles there. They had to come out of that, and they have to mature, and they have to fulfill, they have to seek their human identity. And it is easier to live through someone else than to complete yourself. Now, the freedom to lead and plan your life is frightening if you have never faced it before. This is one aspect which I want to speak about more. Usually, women are frightened to take responsibilities, especially in their career. There is a hesitation, and especially when it is in a mixed group, there they hesitate how to, even now, how to boss men, how to extract work from them. I have seen in my own personal experience how women hesitate to do that, and it is frightening when a woman finally realizes that is not alone her fear to lead and plan her own life, but also to answer the question, who am I, except the voice inside herself. So who am I is the next question there. So for all these feminist thoughts and ideas and ideologies, if somebody asks a woman, who are you and what do you want, whether she'll be able to answer, that is the greatest question. So first, women, first they have to analyze, as Emerson says, know thyself. First we have to know who we are, and what is our needs, what we have to do as our own self, that self identity. That is what almost in all women strive to. And here Friedan points out men are not the enemy but the fellow victims. They really initialized and internalized in that way that they always sideline themselves. They foreground men, they foreground patriarchal ideologies themselves. But for all Betty Friedan's work, there were people who condemned, criticized her. One is Bell Hooks. So, feminist theorist Bell Hooks took Betty Friedan's book to task for its racial exclusion, because Betty Friedan's book was something pertaining to upper middle class white women, and she did not include other categories. And so now comes Bell Hooks, who is known as Gloria Jean Watkins, and Bell Hooks is her pen name, and she writes it in lowercase to shift the attention from her identity to ideas. So she wants to be better known by her ideas than her identity. So she is also an American author and professor and social activist. So Bell Hooks, an Afro-American. Now this phrase, a very interesting factors you would now see there. The phrase imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist and patriarchy. So this phrase is indicative of Bell Hooks' conceptual and theoretical position. Now, sensitive to the relational character of structures influencing the social order. See, all these structures, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist and patriarchy, all these structures, how they influenced the social order, and to locate these structures within a global and historical context. How these structures are located not only in one particular place but in globally, and historically how it takes turns in each time, in each geographical positions there, or in each temporal or spatial context. So the call to examine marginality as a site of resistance. So writing from the periphery is not something, it is also considered as a site of resistance rather than a place of despair and deprivation. So Bell Hooks contends that margins also have the potential to be locations that offer radical possibilities to create counter-hegemonic ways of knowing and being. So even from the margins too, you can create a counter-hegemonic ways of knowing and being. It need not be always the center. So she is examining from the margins, and her book, Feminist Theory from Margin to Center. So she notes there, she notes how popular feminist ideologies lack diverse voices. So to be in the margins is to be part of the whole, but outside the main body. So this is always the contention of Afro-American, where they are excluded in the mainframe feminist theories written by white Europeans. And now she claims, so how women in lower class, poor groups, particularly those who are non-white, would not have defined women's liberation as women gaining social equality with men, since they are continually reminded in their everyday lives that all women do not share a common social status. Even many aspects, many theories cannot be applicable to all arenas, all social groups, all cultural groups. So it has diversity as such, and women gaining social equality, we are reminded. So it is not a common social status. All women's liberation cannot be applicable to everyone. And intersectionality, it is where she brings in this concept of intersectionality. So she used the work as a platform, so to offer a new, more inclusive feminist theory. So her theory encouraged the long-standing idea of advocated for women to acknowledge their differences, the differences women had, and accepting each other. So she challenged feminists to consider gender's relation to race, class, sex, and this is what this concept intersectionality. So you have to, it is intersecting the different races, the different classes and sex. And not only that, so she argues that how male involvement is important in the equality movement, stating that for a change to occur, men must do their part. Men must also be involved in whatever movements or in whatever struggles or revolution women make. So she also calls for a restructuring of the cultural framework of power. So one that does not find oppression of others necessary. So there must be a restructure of cultural framework. And part of this restructuring involves allowing men into the feminist movement. So feminist movement need not be a separationist ideology. So it can incorporate comradeship. We have to include men too. So allow men too into the feminist movement, make them understand what is women's needs and why they struggle, and to live in to bring in an amicable society where men and women are equal. For that, a restructuring of the cultural framework is necessary, she says. And in a very important and interesting another aspect is this, how the black female spectators. So in Rethinking the Nature of Work, so in her work called Rethinking the Nature of Work, Hooks raises a pertinent question. So many women active in feminist movement do not have this perspectives. They are unwilling to face certain realities, because when they become self-sufficient, when they become economically powerful within the structure, they try to retreat, they try to withdraw. They are not so interested in feminist movements, and they become like a strategy, a protective strategy. They try to shrink from this feminist movements, and they don't take an active part in that. So why is it so? Now, and also Hooks explains another aspect of atrocity meted out to black people. So she explains how she began to grow curious of the results of black slaves being punished for looking at their white owners. See how it is. So to look for having a look at the white owners, how black slaves have been punished. And she wondered how much had been absorbed and carried on through the generations to affect not only black parenting but black spectatorship as well. So these children would be parented from their childhood that they must avoid looking into white owners and this parenting. But in spite of this black parenting, see, Bell Hooks writes that because she remembered how she had dared to look at adult as a child, even though she was forbidden, she knew that slaves had looked too. So drawing on Foucault's thoughts about power always coexisting with the possibility of resistance. See, Foucault says power always coexisted with the possibility of resistance. Hooks discusses this looking as a form of resistance, as a way of finding agency and declaring, not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality. So this is Bell Hooks, who says that even looking itself is a form of resistance. If you deny, if you refuse, or if you are going to suppress me for not to have a look, I'll do that. So not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality. So this is one idea of Bell Hooks, how even looking was a form of resistance. So that was Bell Hooks, and now we move on to Hélène Cixous. So who was born in 1937. You must have heard of Hélène Cixous, a professor, a French feminist, a poet, a playwright, philosopher, a rhetorician, and a very well-known writer for that essay, The Laugh of the Medusa. And in that, she has contributed to the world of feminist writing this term, literature feminine, a concept coined by her in her landmark manifesto, and a method and practice of writing, feminine writing. Cixous' ongoing concern about the effects of difference, exclusion of women, the struggle for identity by women, and the overcoming of Western logocentrism. So how language played, how European language played a part in establishing patriarchal ideologies and suppressing women, and not allowing them to express themselves through writing. And so this work is considered a key text within our concept of literature feminine, and informs our advocacy for the freeing of writing and the freeing of the self through writing. So first you write, and through writing you can free yourself, is the message she conveys to women. So Cixous issues an ultimatum to women. Either you read, or you choose to stay trapped in their own bodies, and which does not allow them to express themselves. So the way you have to write. So the body as a way to communicate, she says. So she describes this writing style, literature feminine. She says it attempts to move outside the conversational rules found in patriarchal system. So this through this, she's addressing women, and she's asking women to build strong self narratives and identity. So this text is situated in a history of feminist conversations that separated women in terms of their gender and in terms of authorship. So how women were being separated because they were women, and because they were women they were not given a chance to write, because language was not so conducive to them. So what language she could write, let her write through body, what her body communicates. See, she uses the term the logic of anti-love to describe her understanding of the systematic oppression of women in patriarchal figures. This is always there. Invisibly, women have to understand how the self-hatred of women, so this patriarchal ideologies have made women an anti-narcissism. So they have made for women an anti-narcissism, because men's writing are self-admiratory, it is self-congratulatory, and it is self-glorification. Whereas women, through in that way, this narcissistic way of writing of men, a narcissism which loves itself only to be loved by what women haven't got. So by writing so, women feel that is a model which they have before them, the way men have written. So men have written about themselves, and men have written about women as such. So this idea persecutes women by defining them by what misogynistic tradition believes, and makes the female sex inferior. So almost all the models, all the stories that had been written on women, it was something how men viewed the male perspective of women. So when she doesn't find things, something which is pertaining to her where she doesn't fit, there comes a self-hatred. Now Cixous commends women to focus on individuality, particularly the individuality of the body, and to redefine self-identity in the context of her history and narrative. So in what historical period she is, so let them redefine their self-identity, and not to look into male role models created by men. And so this essay includes the argument that writing is a tool women must use. So writing is a tool to acquire the freedom women have historically been denied. So if you want to liberate yourself, writing is one tool through which you can liberate yourself. This is the idea she gives to women. And she says, so it is you write through your body. So this, while this the essay was originally published in 1975, it was republished once again to Laughing with Medusa. So she reintroduces Medusa as a queer body, and she disrupts from this traditional masculine feminine binary. So Cixous recognizes her own work on the Medusa as a queer, as a body through which to shift boundaries and challenge social expectations. So how to write? So this has also been another major aspect hindering women's writing, because she doesn't know whether she had to write on her own, like her own, as she wishes, or through the role models that has been created by man, through this language created by man. So to shift boundaries and challenge social expectations is what she's asking women to do. And so her imagination of Medusa, so Medusa, the Gorgon-headed Medusa, So how she had been portrayed as an evil monster, but Hélène Cixous portrays not as a terrific beauty, but a woman. She gives a different meaning and feminine. She considers Medusa as a power of women and empowers sexuality to experience the pleasure that awaits within the discovery of alterity within oneself and between all forms of bodies. So through your body, through your desire, say the critic goes on to relate women's writing to their bodily experiences that represent a source of desire and urge for creativity. So through your body, so what your body desires, either in the form of creation, or what is its needs, what is its wants, what is its pains, what is its desires. So even Hélène Cixous, so she shares how, for expressing the deepest desire in her, how she was how she shocked people as such. They even she was feared for her intellectual superiority, and this so if at all, if the prejudice, she says the prejudice that she experienced was not her problem, it was a problem of the onlookers. Now she says that to write the body, through the body, a source of desire. So the bodily experiences where it represents a source of desire and urge for creativity. So through your body, you could write the experiences, what you experience, what your mind experiences. So it is not only talking about female sexuality, about motherhood, about maternity, about deep desires, and about even studies, your intellectual pleasures, you have your intellectual ideologies, the fear to express, what would be thought, what would be the reception. That is one aspect which women really fear. And she says to come out of all these fears and to write from your bodily experience what is which is the source of desire, and which also has the urge for creativity. Creativity can be in any way. Writing writing need not be in one particular genre, even that is interdisciplinary, as we said. It is something where prose was a male arena. So to come out of that, which has an orderliness, which has been established, to write even through poetry, to sing songs, which has been the oral tradition all these days. So to the urge for creativity, you could write in any manner, in any genre, and in any what all experiences you have. To come out with all your bodily experiences is what she urges women to do. Now, after Hélène Cixous, so I move on to another interesting feminist, Susan Faludi. Susan Faludi, she is an American feminist, journalist, and author, and her book Backlash, the Undeclared War Against American Women, was hailed as the most vehement, and after so many years, to issue from the feminist camp in so many years. And it is not a book of her own ideology, but she gives a lot of statistical data, and she presents how media had played a very big role in the backlash against feminist advances. She argues that backlash is a strong negative reaction. They use the strategy of blaming the victim itself. One moment. One moment, please. Venkatesh. Kartika, could you hear me? Hello, Kartika?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, yes. I
Okay.
can hear you,
Is the
ma'am.
PPT visible? Is the PPT visible?
It's visible. You can just put it in the slideshow, ma'am. Visible, ma'am.
Slideshow. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, okay. But my picture is
Uh,
not visible, isn't it? It's okay,
yes,
but
ma'am.
I'll
You
I'll
have
continue with.
you.
Yes, yes. 1 minute. Going to slide share konga. Yes, Susan Faludi. Kartika, is it audible?
Clear, ma'am. It's audible, ma'am. Perfect. You can
And
proceed.
yes, okay. So now, so how how media uses the strategy of blaming the victim, and by suggesting that women's liberation movement itself is a cause of many problems alleged to be plaguing women in the late 1980s. So this was a book which created waves, and she found out that the statistical data given related to the bleak marital prospects for single educated career women were full of errors. And she also argues that the problems are illusory. How media constructs without reliable evidence in order to keep women at their place as such. And she was inspired to write this backlash after investigating the statistics behind a 1986 Newsweek cover story that reported on a Harvard Yale study. And she found out not only this, she started examining, is it only this story regarding single educated career women, or other sensational stories about women that were being promoted by the media. She discusses a lot of aspects in this backlash, talking about the cosmetic industry, how they play a role in promoting all the creams, all the different types of treatments that are meted out to be beautiful, and all such things she discusses about maternity, about medical field. This book is something full of evidences with statistics. She gives a lot of evidences related to how media is projecting, how media plays a part in backlash, in blaming the victim, in blaming women, and keeping them in their own place. And a very another important writer I wanted to share with you is this Patrocinio Schweikart. She talks about how, in reader response theory, how books are constructed, how texts are constructed. A text, when we teach girl children, when they take books related to talking about the stories of men, talking about male related texts, how a woman would read, what would be the response of women, how it affects them. So, gender profoundly affects how and what we read. So, what we read affects our own sense of self. So, this most important development in reading theory. So, this is even when you read texts such as even Raja Rao's Coolie, where it talks about the story of Munu. It is where it talks about the story of Munu, where it one in his views, in his views, we look into all the women characters. Raja Rav's, it is Mulkraj Anand, I'm sorry, it is Mulkraj Anand's Coolie. Now the single, so here in the same way, that is for example, in Patricia Schweikart, she explores how uh, the developments in feminist reading theory, how there must be a reader response theory needs feminist criticism too. If a woman reads, if a girl reads, when she gives examples of how women, when they enter undergraduation, the text that she finds is the text something like that, responsibilities of a man. And even if there is a description about a man watching a girl, how she has to read it like a man or like a girl, how she has to read. So there is a confusion in women as such there. And so here, for women, the reader response theory needs feminist criticism too. We have to take into mind when women read, how it affects them and how a sense of self, it affects their own sense of self. We have to keep in mind that too while prescribing, while writing, and we have to approach the different texts written by men, how it would be viewed in female view as such. Even in our own mythological stories in India, for example, the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, the various characters. So we have Sita being portrayed by Valmiki or Tulasidasar or Kambar. We have many characters. They praise Lakshmana's sacrifice. So is there a reference of Lakshmana's wife Urmila, how she felt when Lakshmana left her to the forest? So are there records related to how a woman feels? So we talk high praise about Buddha's story. Okay, there was the renunciation of Buddha. But what about his wife Yashodhara? So reading these texts, if women reads, to reread, and we need such a reader response theory and needs that feminist criticism too. Excuse me. So Schweikart adduces two separate strands in feminist reading theory. So first, there is the resisting reader. So the women reader who resists this patriarchal assumptions and which are emasculating forces. Emasculating weakens her ideas. So she feels weak while reading such texts where the assumptions, patriarchal assumptions are established strongly. And secondly, there is a rewriting of the canon, so necessitated by a specifically feminist reading of women's. So such rereading is a critique of androcentric reading and a redescription of women reading. So we have many women writers rereading these mythological stories, viewing that stories in feminist perspective. So that is one rereading which we have to do in order to disrupt patriarchal assumptions and male written texts. So in both the cases, Schweikart argues reading theory needs feminist criticism to escape this eternal dualism. This eternal dualism is to locate authority whether in the text or in the reader. So conventional reader response criticism tries to locate authority in the text or in the reader. So we also have to, in reader response theory, the reader is an extended author, and feminist criticism argues for the female reader who will be an extended author, how she views a text. And finally, Schweikart addresses the question of what it would mean to read as a woman. So she is addressing, so she even quotes from James Joyce, how women reader are disrupted when they read a novel of James Joyce in the view of a hero. As a woman, when you read it, how does it feel for her? She may differ from views what the man expresses, but she has to abide by the text, what is written by the man. So let the woman say, if it is going to be a critique of, about women, so she would feel happy if this is done. Let the woman say if she feels happy if it is done, not the man say it. Of course, we come across in our own daily lives where men say, I think if this is done, you'll feel happy. So usually I would say, let me say whether I feel happy or not. Let not the man say. So this is one thing where women have to voice, and women have to read any text in their own view. And even this theory, what Patriciano Speckart says, it is this theory which is it needs feminist criticism, because most texts emasculates women. So emasculating forces operate when they read male-centered text, and they have to come out of this. They have to view the text in their own view. If you start viewing text in such a manner, there you will find new meanings emerging. You will give new meanings to the same text which was written by men. Now moving on uh, to Maya Angelou, who's not only not a theorist in the sense as we have seen all these writers, different type of writers, different theorists. She is a practitioner. She's a practitioner to the core, and as she says, I am a feminist. She's the one whom I have seen who acknowledges, who says boldly that she is a feminist, and her own life itself is an example for feminism. So now she's saying, I am a feminist and I have been a female for a long time now. I'd be stupid not to be on my own side. This is Maya Angelou. So for all the critics whom we have seen, there is a few critics, few feminist theorists whose life has been something different, or there have been controversy regarding their personal life and their writing. But Maya Angelou is one who is a feminist to the core. Her life itself is an example of being a feminist. And see how she says. So each time a woman stands up for herself without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women. So even you need not acknowledge yourself being a feminist. If you are going to stand up for your own self, if you are going to even claim, so if you are going to establish your claims, if you're going to stand up, if you're going to voice your voice, give a voice, lend a voice for another women, then you are for women. So you need not even say strongly that you are a feminist. So she was one, and her autobiography is a proof for all this feminist manifesto. And one great support is her mother Vivian Baxter, who had been all supportive, who had been behind all her endeavors. And she herself is a great feminist, and the support of her mother is one factor. Her last book, written in I suppose in 2013, Mom, Me and Mom, is of a great evidence of how her mother had been a great inspiration, and she herself has been an inspiration. Maya Angelou herself has been a great inspiration. So she is one who had established herself not in the African world but in the Afro-American world, where racism is at the high, at the peak there. So she tried to carve a niche for herself and for her community, and with kindness. So when you read her essays, which are also extracts from her own autobiography, you will come across the tool which she had used is kindness, empathy for other people, and how she braved all the ends, all the odds, all the struggles, even from a young age. And she doesn't have any hesitation to share with the readers all those things which happened to her in her life. So she is a true feminist in the sense there, and her whole life itself is a thought, feminist thought. Her whole life itself is an example for all the feminist thoughts. And another one is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she's a youngster, as you know, a Nigerian whose works ranges from novels to short stories and non-fiction. So why I included her? So we have come around, we have come a full round starting from Virginia Woolf, and she's the last one in my list. Her, we should all be feminists, is a speech she gave to TEDx, and then afterwards it was published in a book length essay. And there she talks about the definition of feminism as for 21st century. So it demands an annihilation of the gender hierarchy and not women's rule over men, as is often misinterpreted. And why I included this Chimamanda Adichie is she is sharing the experience how she was not allowed into a pub in Nigeria, and she was asked to have a company of a male, like Virginia Woolf not denied entry into the library. She was also denied entry into the public space, and how even now in the present day context, how stereotypes, how patriarchy ideologies are there, and how it oppresses women. It is not much different from what Virginia Woolf, which made me think that we have, even though we have come a long way, we have so many feminist theorists, different ideologies regarding text, regarding social, political, cultural aspects. But even in spite of that, still we have to go a long way. In certain areas, in certain contexts, in certain geographical arena, there are improvements, but still we have to go in third world countries, in third world countries, and in many, so in many class, caste, racial sectors, in unorganized sectors, still women are facing all these patriarchal patriarchal assumptions as such there. Now here she focuses how this feminism has been used, and somehow even now some people oppose the idea of feminism by calling it as a humanist project. But she says feminism is of course part of human rights in general, but to choose to use the vague expression human rights is don't make it vague, don't bring it under the broader light. If at all, if it has been brought, then we have to
Kindly excuse me, participants. Speaker has some technical glitches in her side. She will join soon. Participants, Madam has joined. We'll start within few seconds. Thank you for being patient. We'll start within few seconds. Madam, you are in. You can just proceed, ma'am.
Kartika?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, okay, Kartika.
You have scrolled the slides, I think so, no? Ah, yes.
So, Kartika, could you hear? And
Ah, yes,
is the
ma'am.
PPT
Perfect.
visible,
It's
Kartika?
clear, ma'am. It's
Okay,
visible.
okay,
You
okay,
can proceed,
okay,
ma'am. Thank you.
okay, okay. So now the word feminist, it comes with a negative tag, and the assumption how the various assumptions marriage or the culture jokes, and how feminist means they are people who are always angry, they hate makeup, they don't like children or marriage. All these are assumptions. Adichie makes it very clear. And of course, usually whenever we talk about feminism, or when they give us a tag that we are feminists, and we are like man haters, and we hate all these patriarchal institutions to the core. It is not so. And the norms are not set in a day. So, how the norms that are set for all these ideologies? So, she says it is not set in a day or two, and nor could it be undone immediately. It has been a long process, and for normalization, it is an ongoing result of a long process. And how they overpower us when we try to break out of them every single day. So when we try to change the norms which had been there for a long time, and she says that we have to evolve some new norms to break the stereotypical gendered norms. And she's asking these questions. What if in raising children we focus on ability instead of gender? And what if we focus on interest instead of gender? So when we focus on the ability of a child and the interest of a child, instead of looking into whether it is a girl child or a boy child, and how the problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. So the problem is how we are, not looking into how we are, but how we should be. So she also gives this prescription. See how, imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. So if we didn't have the gender expectations, how happy we would be. And she speaks about a lot of other things, how to bring a boy child. So we have to more and more we have to focus not only on the socialization or internalization of certain norms in the girl child, but also in the bringing up of a boy child. We have to focus on the brought up of a boy child, how the child, how that child is also a victim of socialization. A boy child is expected to be always to stand up, to be the breadwinner of the family, and all these norms are also constraining and restricting boys too. So we have to break all these assumptions, norms, and we have to create a new world where an individual could be free to express themselves, to be happy, for a happy world. So we have to be free to express our own true individual selves. So with that, I close my lecture, and I would be open to answer your questions if you have. And thank you. So this is about related to feminist ideologies. How from Virginia Woolf to Chimamanda Adichie, we have even more. We have many people I could not bring in for the want of space and time. These are the few people whom I thought are something different and interesting I found out. And one aspect for all these thoughts and ideologies, for all the speech given by women all these 1 week, you must have noticed even in the resource person, the anxiety, the stress, the disturbances to switch on and to switch off the light, the child weeping and the resource person getting up and going. So how women are taken, how serious women are taken, even though they are addressing an international forum, is also another point which we have to note. In spite of all the efforts we make, in spite of all the sharing of knowledge, still how serious women are taken, their speech is taken, is also one thing which we have to notice apart from all the speech and knowledge that has been shared by the resource person. And I take this opportunity to thank the organizers for having invited me and giving me a space, giving to be a part of this international webinar, the series webinar. Thank you.
There is some audio problem. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. It was really wonderful to have you, and it was really wonderful presentation, ma'am. Uh, we could see so much of comments, appreciation to your presentation, ma'am, and few questions also. If it is possible, can we take the questions, or shall pass it on you, ma'am?
Yes, Kartika. I'll take the questions. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. You're audible, ma'am.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
Kartika.
I'll take few questions, ma'am. I know there is a strain in your throat, and I couldn't continuously do that. I will take few questions, ma'am.
Okay.
One question: with feminism being broadened into gender studies in the contemporary world, is women's issue being relegated to the background with queer studies and masculinity studies as newer fields of study and activism? It's a long question, ma'am. I'll just repeat it.
Yes, Kartika.
Uh, with feminism being broadened into gender studies in the contemporary world, is women's issue being relegated to the background with queer studies and masculinity studies as a newer fields of study and activism?
Yes, I wanted to include a slide because of, as I said, want of space I did not include. A very wonderfully written article by Shoshana Feldman, Women and Madness. So she brings in the story of Balzac's Adieu. So that story is about, it is in three parts. It talks about a woman who goes mad, and she becomes, she doesn't speak, she mutes, she's muted in the sense she doesn't speak, but her lover goes in search of her, and there is also a war that is happening there during that time period. The three parts are, one part is about that woman, madness of that woman, and the two parts are, one is about the war which is going on and the lover coming in search of that woman, and the third part is how he tries to recover her from the madness. But in all these things, there are critics who talk about only the historical part of the war. They never speak about the madness of that woman. And this is how feminist critics point out how even in criticism there is a bias, and how women and madness are not taken seriously, how they are relegated to the background, and how the glorification of the war and how the glorification of the man who takes all the attempts to bring her to senses, but bringing her to senses is something where she recovers and she identifies the lover and she dies. So this identification of that man is what he expects. So this is how even the story, even though the story is written in by Balzac, and where the story is something about Adieu is the name of that short story, where the focus is on women and madness, but that is relegated to the background, and the male critics focus on the man's part of the story in that book as such there, in that short story. So this happens, this also happens, how women's issues even in criticism, though the story, when a woman reads now Shoshana Feldman, she rewrites, and in a feminist point of view she points out how madness is something not real madness, it is something where it is like a political castration, and how women could not voice their opinion, how women could not say what they want, and it is like a help seeking and help needing by women. So this is, of course, women's issues are relegated to the background in male criticism. When we are talking about feminist literary criticism, where even in criticism too, man relegates women in the background, and they take masculine issues. As I said, self-glorification is always there. I think I have,
Yes, ma'am.
I have,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
justified the
Yes,
question.
ma'am. I'll take one more question, ma'am.
Yes.
With which theorist will you like to align with keeping your own experience as a woman with multiple roles, perhaps as a wife or mother or daughter, sister, and so on?
Yes, Kartika, please repeat it. Pardon?
Uh, with which theorist will you like to align with your keeping your own experience as a woman, like the multiple roles, perhaps as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and so on?
Betty Friedan, of course,
So
is one.
he's asking about the question that
Betty Friedan, I think
with which theorist uh,
theorist. It's with theorist.
you like to align. You like to align. He's posing a question to you, man. With
Yes.
you like to align with keeping your own experience as a woman.
Yes, in the Indian context, Betty Friedan's that feminine mystic is something which is very true to, where we often think about that we are happy homemakers. We could feel happy homemakers, and another one is Susan Faludi, of course, where even this women's liberation, the stress that is there on the present day young generation that they have to be career women is more and more mounting on them. If they had completed their degrees, and they are, of course they are supposed to go, or they have to take up a job, or else all their education is of waste. I would say that let us allow women to be free even though they are educated. If they want to be happy homemakers, let them be. If they want to be career women, let them be. Let us allow women to blossom. If she wants to blossom like a lotus, or if she wants to blossom like a rose or a lily or a lotus, let it be her own choice. This is also another one point which we have to, let us not force women because they're educated that they have to be career women. Because of circumstances, they would have got into this job or other things there. But if at all, if they want to be at home, there are some women who would like to be at home. Let them be. So that is also one thing where Susan Faludi says, of course, liberation itself, all this feminist movement itself at times lays a stress on women. Yes, Kartika.
Uh, why do some people identify as feminists? What does it mean?
And that we have to ask them why they identify themselves as humanists. That is only a term. It is usually women who are dissatisfied with their lot, who are vehement, We have a lot of feminists, radical, liberal feminists. So some women want to identify themselves like that. It is to them. How could we give an explanation for them? It is up to them. So they have to speak and they have to give an explanation. Yes, sir.
Yes. I'll take one more question.
Yeah.
Eve calling Adam her author, since she was created from his rib, says that as God commands Adam, so man commands women. What is your opinion about Milton's word, ma'am?
Of course, in the feminist point of view, we have to reread Milton. We have to reread, and we can't accept as such there. And even there are a lot of articles related to how even the Bible. So we don't contest the Bible. So I have the question: Eve calling Adam her author, since she was created from his rib. So it is his own view, Milton. He is reflecting the times, the Puritan time as such. He is reflecting his own Puritan time, but we need not accept if it is so. And we have come a long way. This is one another patriarchal assumption that a woman to establish the inferiority of women. This is what we have started rereading such text, and we try to give new meanings as such there. So man commands women. My opinion is that he reflects, Milton reflects his own age. We need not accept, since it is Milton, we need not accept this view.
Yes, ma'am.
We can
Um,
reread and we can
okay.
rewrite,
Yes,
saying that it need not be,
yes, ma'am.
and blaming women for all the, as perpetrators of all the troubles, opening the Pandora's box. It need not be. We have to rewrite, and we have to reread such works. Yes, Karthik.
What do feminists believe about the therapy relationship?
I couldn't get you. What?
What do feminists believe about the therapy relationship? He's asking about the therapy relationship. What do feminists believe on that?
What is peripheral? I don't.
Therapy relationship. The
Relate.
question is about
What do feminists believe about the therapy relationship? I don't know what they mean by therapy relationship. I don't know what is therapy relationship, so I can't comment about that. I don't know what is this therapy relationship. I have not come across. These are new terms. Yes.
okay. Uh,
What do feminists
a
believe?
question like
And yes, I am not sure. I'm not very much informed
okay.
about this therapy relationship, so I can't comment. I think there is a question here, Kartika. I think why we don't include Dalit women's predicament.
Dalit women's predicament in the mainstream of
No,
feminism.
nowadays we are doing that. We, of course, we have Dalit feminism. We have Meena Alexander. We have, of course, we are including it in mainstream. This is Dalit feminism is pertaining to particularly to India. That is what intersectionality, Bell Hooks talks about. So we include the race, the class, all the marginalized, and we include, of course, Dalit women's predicament in the mainstream feminism. We read Bama's Karuku, we read Meena Alexander's poem. Of course, we discuss about that. Slowly it is upcoming. We are not excluding them. We are including in our text, and we are, of course, talking about Dalit literature and Dalit feminism too. There are exclusive workshops, writings, books on Dalit criticism on Dalit mainstream feminism is going on. And yes, of course, I think
I
I'll
will
take
take
the question. What is the difference? Yes, Kartika, is that time?
I'll take
I
one more
think
final question, ma'am. One
we
more
are.
final question. It is related to
Yes.
your title, I think so. Why the usage of the word wilderness in the title? Is the feminist
Yes,
ideology given that metaphor? If so, why?
Yes. See, wilderness is something where there is no orderliness. That is, it is nature in the wildest sense. I have used it in that way. Because I have chosen diverse topics, diverse feminist ideology, and it is not in an orderly, in no order, in an haphazard, in a random way I have chosen. and you can't fix any one ideology in one particular point of time. There are diverse opinions, diverse thoughts, and this diversity is one aspect why I gave this a journey into wilderness and nothing else.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for your patient answering for all the questions, ma'am. It was really wonderful listening to your presentation and your answering the questions, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for accepting your consent and being here with us, ma'am.
Thank you, Kartika. Thank you. So, can I leave, Kartika?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Dear participants, we are in our validity section, um, and we have a special guest speaker among us. So, who is a guest speaker of this validity session? I would like to welcome Dr. Sushma V.Murthy, Associate Professor, Christ University, Bangalore. Welcome, ma'am. You're muted, I think so, ma'am. You're muted. You can just unmute yourself, ma'am.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I didn't have permission till then. Now I got the permission. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So
Yes.
before going
Okay.
into the session, I would like to give some few introduction to Madam. Almost, she's a very renowned personality among this arena. I would like to introduce her with few words. Dr. Sushma V. Murthy is Associate Professor at Department of English, Christ University, and she teaches gender studies, post-colonial, world literature studies, cultural studies, built and British literature. She was affiliated to the University of Montreal under the Shastri Doctoral Research Fellowship in 2007 to 8 and secured a doctoral degree in the year 2014 for her dissertation, The Burnished Phoenix, Lesbian Aesthetics in the Works of Nicole Brossard, from the University of Mysore. Her research interests include queer theory and literature, feminist translation studies, psychoanalytical feminism, and trauma narratives by women. Her publications include research articles on feminist translation, transgender, aesthetics, and queer theory. Currently, Dr. Sushma Vibhuti is completing a major research project on the select popular fiction of Triveni, a prominent psychoanalytical feminist writer in Canada, and the project examines psychocultural aspects of women's mental health disorders with heightened focus on the gender narrativization of trauma in the cases of hysteria. So with that short note, I would like to welcome ma'am. I wish you to take over the session, ma'am.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we could, ma'am.
Yeah, there is some problem. I think I lost a lot of audio when you were talking. I hope that's okay. Yeah, so I will start sharing my screen. To begin with, I would like to thank Dr. Kartika and the faculty of Parashakti College for Women, Kutralam, for giving me this opportunity. Okay, and let me start sharing my screen. Yes, yes. So I hope all of you can see my screen. Yeah. Dr.
Yes, ma'am.
Kartika,
It's
is it
visible. You
visible?
can have a slideshow now, ma'am.
Yes, okay.
Yes, ma'am. It's
Okay,
visible.
so
Mhm.
yeah, so I can go up to 8 o'clock, right? And after that, you will have your question and answer session.
Yes,
Is
yes,
that
ma'am.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
okay, yes. Okay, so I have chosen to talk on a very different, approach to feminism today. I've also tried to look at contemporary texts because it's very common for us to go back to texts that we're already familiar with, or it's very common for us to look at feminism in a certain way, right? So my idea is to have as much representation as possible in terms of masculinities, femininities, and also queer texts that problematize our given notions of masculinity and femininity. And that's the reason why I have termed this presentation Dissonant Voices, Resonant Texts, Gender in Contemporary Literature. Okay, so yes, so it's full screen now.
Yes, ma'am.
So to begin with, I would like you to question the very basis of gender. Okay. So when we call somebody a woman, what is the foundation for that idea of woman? Where does it come from? So it basically comes from our understanding of the distinction between sex and gender. And we believe that sex is something that is biologically given to us. We are born with it. And gender is something that we acquire through socialization, through processes of interaction with the society and culture. Okay. So I want you to, in the first few slides or in the few minutes that I put into this presentation, I want you to question that notion of sex and gender, because that is what feminism is doing today. Okay. So I have actually looked at my presentation through these different approaches. Okay. So this is not a chronological overview of my presentation. Rather, it is a summary of the important aspects that I will be highlighting. And I hope that I will be able to give you new insights into the kinds of writings that have come into feminism, into masculinities, and of course, the contemporary discourses of gender fluidity across the gender spectrum. Okay, and that is the reason why, I would like to look at heterogeneity, and I call this threading heterogeneity into the fabric of gender, the patchwork quilt of contemporary femininities and masculinities. Okay, so to begin with, right, we will be questioning the biological determinism of gender. Okay, and I will come to that. What do we mean by biological determinism, and why do we need to challenge that, and how has it been challenged? Secondly, I will be looking at the notion of sexuality. Okay, because the idea of sexuality is very closely bound to the narrativization of gender in the past, you could say 3 or 4 decades now, ever since the identity politics of the 1970s and 80s and the second wave feminist movement, right? We have not just questioned gender, we have also started questioning sex, okay, the biology of gender. Okay, so I want you therefore to also look at texts which actually extend the meaning of sexuality, or they, transgress the naturalized or normalized meaning of sexuality. Okay, the last part of my presentation will look at two very important discourses in the realm of gender studies, which are becoming very prominent today. One is performativity, of course, which all of you are familiar with, and that is a theory which is closely associated with Judith Butler, and affect. And affect is an approach or a concept or even a theory, you could call it a set of theories of affect, which take a very different lens to the whole politics of gender. Okay, so I have termed these as new ontologies of gender, and not epistemologies. So I will give you that distinction also, what we mean by epistemology and why we are looking at an ontology of gender. Why are we not looking at an epistemology of gender? Okay, so this is a quotation that I thought would be very interesting to begin the presentation with. Okay, and this is from one of my favorite authors, Chimamanda Adichie, right, from Nigeria. She says the problem with gender is that it prescribes how we should be rather than recognizing how we are. Now imagine how much happier we would be, how much freer to be our true individual selves if we didn't have the weight of gender expectations. So we believe that gender is something that we should be in terms of what the society demands us to be, right? But gender is actually what we are, okay? And what you are is highly individual, what you are is highly subjective, what you are has a lot to do with your interactions with the larger institutions and frameworks and hegemonic structures around you. Okay, so like you said, I mean, like you already know, there is, I mean, one is not born a woman but becomes one, like Beauvoir said in the way back in the 1940s, she said that, right? So that is what we are looking at. We are looking at the whole politics of gender as a construct. Okay, and what happens when you are able to understand the ways in which your gender is constructed, right? And if you have the free expression of gender outside of these expectations, then what then becomes the fluidity of gender? Okay, this is a concept which has been explored extensively in recent writings, and in contemporary writings, the idea of gender fluidity is something that imbues both masculinities and femininities. Okay, so to begin with, let us look at biological determinism. Okay, because biological determinism is something that allows us to think that gender is something that is natural. gender is something that is normal, or there are certain normal ways of being a man or being a woman. Okay, so what is biological determinism? Right, it basically means that your biology determines your gender. The idea or the belief system that supports this idea that if you're born into a certain sex, then you are also become a certain gender, and that your sex and gender are directly aligned with each other, that they follow from each other. Okay, so what is gender? I'm sorry, I think there's a mistake here. There is a word that's missing there. What I meant was, what is gender and who determines it? Okay, so I want you to look at a long history of biological determinism. Okay, and how gender has been understood as something that flows naturally from the anatomy into which you are born. Okay, so I would particularly want you to look at two people, right, who problematize this notion of biological determinism, right? For example, I want you to look at Gates and Thompson, right, who believed that being a woman or being a man had to do with your metabolic state, right? And they said that women have a different metabolic state, and that is why they belong to a different gender, and men have a different metabolic state. And they said women are anabolic, right, which means that they are passive. They are not action oriented, they are more thought oriented, right? They go deeper into emotions, right? And therefore women do not necessarily relate to the external world, right? They believe, these theorists believe that women are anabolic, right? And if you are anabolic, it means that you are mostly in the passive state, and you do not necessarily, right, like to get involved in politics or mathematics or things that have to do with the world, for example. Whereas a catabolic being is a being who externalizes himself, who is very active, who has a very active relationship with the outside world. Okay, so this was one theory which very biologically stated what being a woman was and what being a man was. Please notice here that they are not just looking at your anatomy. They are not looking at the biological characteristics which allow for the categorization of sexes, although that is also problematic. Okay, they are actually looking at the whole, discourse of gender through biology. Okay, by saying that you have a metabolic state that is inherent to you if you're a woman, and that is why women are passive. And if you're a man, you have a very inherent metabolic state which is catabolic, which means that you're active, and therefore men are more active and women are more passive. And now this is something that is highly problematic. Okay, and the idea between the private realm versus the public realm, or the idea that women cannot be political beings, or that they cannot be rational beings, that women have a high sense of intuition, whereas men do not have intuition, they have intelligence because they are rational thinking beings. So these are some of the age-old stereotypes that we are dealing with, right? And it's the fact that even to this day we are looking for reservation for women in politics, for example, right? Shows you the long history of exclusion of women from the activities of the world, literally. Okay, this is something that was I think propounded. This theory was actually propounded in the late 1880s or 1890s, if I'm not wrong, which is the end of the 19th century. But something as recent as, say, the 20th century, right, when the Times came up with this review of male and female human brains. Okay, I'm sorry, there seem to be some typos here. I'm extremely sorry about that. Apologies for that. So the idea that there is a system in your brain which makes you male or female, right? So the relationship between the left and the right hemispheres was what was examined at this point of time, by the Times Review, right? And the idea that the bunch of nerves which connect the left hemisphere of the brain with the right hemisphere of the brain are different for both men and women, right? And it is this difference, right, in the nervous system of the brain that makes somebody a male or a female, and therefore a woman or a man. Okay, is a theory as recent as the late 20th century. Okay, so time and again you will find biological evidence for gender differentiation. You will also find biological evidence for certain other forms of gender manifestation or gender identity. Okay, so the idea that feminism questioned gender determination through biological determinism, right? It questioned the biological basis of the determination of gender. And how did it do that, right? It did that by asking the question, are women human females and men human males? Obviously, we are looking at humans here, right? So is the human female, right, the woman of the species, and is the human male the man of the species? Does it directly flow that way from sex to gender, right? Is biology determined by sex? And if it is determined by sex, why should it be determined by sex? Was a question that a lot of people asked, including Anne Foster Sterling. Now, Anne Foster Sterling has this very interesting essay. If you have the time, please go and read it. Right? This is a text which questions the biological determinism of not just gender, but also the determinism of sex. It's called the five sexes, why male and female aren't enough. Okay, so in this particular essay, she talks about the intersex body, right? What you would probably identify as the hermaphrodite body. So even as majority of us are born biologically male or biologically female, there is a percentage of the human population which is born with both genitalia, which has a different set of chromosomes, which has different sexual characteristics, right? Whose anatomy has a mixture of both male and female genitalia, right? And that is why she goes on to talk about the merms and the firms. Okay, so you have this example that she gives you, right, where a child who is intersex, which is born with both male and female genitalia, has to immediately fall into one of the two sexes. It has to become either male or female, and that is done through a surgical procedure. And the child has absolutely no control over the surgical procedure, because obviously it's a baby, and the baby cannot, I do not think any baby knows that it has a sex or it has a gender. It is something that we are programmed into, isn't it? So it is usually the doctor or the parents who decide. And how do they decide? So anatomically, they look at the percentage of male genitalia and female genitalia. If there is, if the male genitalia is more prominent than the female genitalia, then the female part of the genitalia will be removed, right? And surgically, the child becomes a male. And if it's the other way around, the child becomes a female. Okay, so the idea that we look at these sexes which are not falling into the larger majority or category of male or female, right, is abnormal. Right, the fact that we consider these identities as abnormal, we consider them as an aberration. Okay, but the fact that all of us are born with matter, right? Of course, we call it biology because that is the narrative that we have for the human body, the narrative of biology. Similarly, we all know that science is a more modern term that we use for what once used to be called as natural law. So if you look at the history of science, I think up until Newton, there was no such thing called as science or modern science, right? The system that was in place, the discourse that was in place was natural law, which means that science was a narrativized version of understanding the world. So science is as much a narrative as literature, as philosophy, right, or any other form of narrative. Okay, so the idea that we are all born of matter and we are made of a materiality that is called as the body, right? And there are certain ideologies that are mapped onto the body, whether it is male or female or masculine or feminine, leads us to the understanding that both sex and gender are constructions, which means that just as your gender is determined by your sex is also biologically determined. This is not to say that you don't have sexual characteristics. All of us do. We have certain primary sexual characteristics which we are born with, and we have certain secondary sexual characteristics, right, which we develop over a period of time, right? But the idea that a certain sex is assigned to the child at the time of birth based on certain prominent sexual characteristics, right, leads us to the understanding that sex is biologically determined, right? So you are not born into a sex, rather you are assigned a sex at birth, and based on the sex that you're assigned at birth, which is again based on your anatomy or your prominent sexual characteristics biologically, right, you become a gender. Okay, so if sex um, and not gender is biologically determined. So it is not gender which is biologically determined. Actually, it is sex which is biologically determined. Would the terms masculine and feminine give more fluidity to discourses of gender? What I simply mean by this is, when you call somebody a woman or when you call somebody a man, can it be applied, right, to examples of people who are neither male nor female? For example, you have a trans male to female, right? Transgender hijra in India, for example, who has undergone sex change or who has not undergone sex change, right? But who dresses up like a woman, behaves like a woman, feels like a woman. Would you call the trans person a woman or not? You would have to, right? But if you go by biological determinism, then you can very easily dismiss the fact that this is a woman, because you will believe that for somebody to be called a woman, she has to be born female. And for somebody to be called a man, he has to he has to be born male. But theories of gender, research into gender, and all the literatures of gender that we look at in the past 2 or 3 decades have shown us that biological determinism should not be the basis for gender. Rather, it is your experience of gender. It's your ontology of gender, which means, your lived experience. What is ontology? Your lived experience. Okay. What example can I give you for that, right? Especially for students. Of course, the faculty members would know, I'm sure. Okay. So, what is my understanding of heat, right? So I can understand heat from the meaning of heat from a dictionary. I can understand the meaning of heat from a textbook of physics, which tells me what heat is, and it might tell me what is the boiling point of water, what is the boiling point of milk. Okay. But I might also understand heat, which is how most of us understand heat, by touching a hot object, right? So remember that time when you were a small young girl or boy, right? When your mom told you, don't touch that, it's hot. And what did you do? You just went and touched it because you wanted to know what hot means, right? Or if there was open flame, you wouldn't hesitate putting your finger into it, because you are at a point of time when meaning was something that was not given to you, but meaning was something that was experienced by. Okay. So today, if I tell you there is a beautiful dish that you have to taste, it's a really nice piece of dessert. What will you do? You will say, ma'am, I want to taste it. Can you tell me where it's available? So you might go and eat at the restaurant, or you might buy something and bring it back home because of the COVID pandemic. I do not know, but it is only when you eat it that you know that it is, right? And that is how we all know things. We don't just know things because we read them. We don't learn them always from knowledge systems, right? So your knowledge systems are your epistemology, right? That is the epistemological way of understanding the world, where there is a system of knowledge, and most of the time that knowledge is formalized, and it tells you what to think, what to believe, what to know, and what not to know, what not to do, right? So, but you know that as a human being, you experience things on your own because of lived experience. So I give you the example of heat, right? So all of us have a certain understanding of heat. What might be extremely hot to me may not be hot to my mother, because she is used to handling a lot of hot objects in the kitchen for many years. Okay. So a person who has fever, right, goes to the doctor and says, doctor, I have fever. Right, the doctor puts in a thermometer, and if the thermometer does not show a rise in temperature, the doctor will say, no, you don't have fever. But you as an individual know you have fever, because that fever is inside. You can feel it inside you, right? And there is something called as feverishness, which cannot even be measured, and that is the most difficult stage, right? At least fever is something that you can treat. What is feverishness? It is something that is very uncomfortable, and you have to deal with it, right? So these are the ontologies of being that we are talking about, right? So you are masculine or feminine, right? Not necessarily in agreement with the sex into which you are born, or you were born, or the sex or the gender that was assigned to you, right? So you have intersex adults who have both male and female genitalia. You have trans gender beings who believe that the gender which they have been assigned based on their biology is not the correct gender. So if they have a male body, they might feel that they are women who are trapped in a man's body, or girls trapped in a boy's body. Okay. So they may undergo sex change, or they may not undergo sex change. Okay. And then you have the transsexuals who question biology and the very root of their biological existence by undergoing transformation of the body. So you have a transsexual, you have a transgender, you have an intersex, being, right? And you have different denominations, you have different kinds of identities, okay? And you also have the transvestite, who is basically just happy with cross dressing, which means that if I dress up like a man tomorrow, that is a transvestite identity, and that is something that I may not want to continue.
Ma'am, excuse me.
Yes, yes.
Can you please change the slide, ma'am? I think.
No, I have not gone to the next point, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So participants are requesting that to change the slides. I can check out, but they are requesting.
No. Actually, I'm still in the last point. That's why I haven't changed the slide.
Okay,
yeah.
Please, ma'am. Okay. Please.
Right. So you will see that I have a lot of small short points, but all that I'm speaking about will not be on the slide. Okay. The slides are just indicators. The main concept will be there, and what I'm discussing is not necessarily on the slide. Okay. Yeah. So the whole point that I'm making here is that both sex and gender are constructed, and that is why we look at biological determinism, right, and social constructivism. So sex is biologically determined based on the majority of the population, right? A sex is assigned. So if your body has a certain genitalia which is male or which is identified as male, you fall into the category of male, and therefore the gender that is ascribed to you is masculine gender. Similarly, if you have female genitalia, and what is female genitalia? We don't really say this child has a vagina. I don't think any a doctor says that. The doctor will say this, this child doesn't have a phallus. Therefore, it is a woman. So the absence of the phallus is a female body, right? Whereas the presence of the phallus is a male body biologically. And based on the biology, therefore, which is determined at the time of birth, right, certain gender characteristics are ascribed to that body, okay? And therefore, you will realize that this is the normative biological construction of sex, following which there is the biological determinism of gender. That men and women are programmed to do different things because they are anatomically different, or their sexual functions are different, right? So you would look at the female body as a reproductive body largely, right? You would look at the female body as a caregiving body, okay? There is nothing wrong with that, right? But does the ontology of the being agree with the normative assumption? So if I'm not comfortable being a mother, if I'm not comfortable giving birth to a child, but society tells me because you're a woman, you have to give birth to a child, now that is what is problematic, okay? Or if a woman is unable to conceive, right? Or if a man is unable to father a child, right? The amount of pressure that the society puts upon you to carry out your reproductive functions, right, is, something that I'm talking about, okay? So we realize when we look at the gender spectrum, so this is what I was referring to, right? I was referring to the gender spectrum. So you have, any number of masculinities and femininities within the spectrum. So you could be a transvestite, female to male or male to female. You could be a transgender, you could be a transsexual, you could be an intersex adult, right? You could be, normative male or female, right? Who might be questioning gender roles, right? By doing things which you are not allowed to do, for example. Okay. So in fact, today morning, I was just listening to one of my neighbors. She was giving a bath to a little girl. I think the girl is about 3 or 4 years old. She's just, taught a few things. Maybe, she's in her UKG or LKG, I don't know, in nursery school. So, the mother was just making the child, remember a few things. So she was saying something like, he is a sailor, he is an engineer, he is a teacher. So all the professions were being taught to the child as he, and all of these were masculine jobs, or jobs that we look at as masculine. So I was extremely surprised. I did not even think about the presentation today. And for a minute, I was just enjoying the conversation between the mother and the child. But then it struck me suddenly that, the child is saying he for everything, right? Why can't it be she is a sailor? Why can't it be she is a doctor? Okay, so what the mother was doing was telling the child what is a sailor, what is a doctor, what is a teacher, what is a engineer. Okay, and the child was introduced to all of these professions in terms of a male. Okay, so I do not know, right, how many different ways in which we program our children into thinking of what is male and what is female, and therefore what is masculine and feminine, right? But the literatures that I'm going to discuss today as examples in this session will, point out to the fact that, right, you can be masculine and feminine not on the basis of biology, not even on the basis of your gender roles, right? So masculinity and femininity are basically performances of gender, right? And they could not, or they need not be in alignment with the sex that is assigned to you. Okay, so I will come back to that a little later, but I hope at this point of time all of you are with me. Okay, right. So one of the first things that feminism does, or feminism did, especially with the whole question of identity politics in the 1970s and 1980s and thereon, right, was to question the biological determinism of gender, right? And instead of looking at gender as biologically determined, right, they began questioning the biological basis of sex itself. Okay, and what does that mean? It means that they moved from biological determinism to discourses of gender. They just looked at gender as ontological experience, as individual experience. So how do I experience my gender? Right? It may be in alignment with my biology, or it may not be in alignment with my biology. It may be in alignment with my biology, but in terms of sexuality, it may not be aligned. Meaning to say that if I'm a woman, I'm supposed to be attracted to a man. But, there are identities, right, who believe in same-sex relationships, who are not attracted to the opposite sex, but they do not have a problem with biology or the gender roles that they're assigned to them, right? So you have different ways of being masculine and feminine, right? And sex and gender are both constructed, and they feed into each other, and they are performed according to the larger histories that you are part of, right? The larger communities you are part of. It could be your religion, it could be your race, it could be your class. In India, it could be your caste, it could be your age. All of these influence the ways in which you perform your gender, right? Therefore, gender is something that is ontologically experienced. It's a lived reality, and therefore it is very subjective, right? And it is not biologically determined. Okay, right. So the second part I want you to look at, this is a very important aspect. Okay, so how do we understand sexuality, right? How do you look at the sexual in sexuality, right? Most of the time, sexuality gets reduced to one act, right? One private act between two individuals. Okay, and you know that the amount of theory and philosophy of gender that has, come into the academia, the amount of literature that has been written about sexuality, right, completely goes against this idea that your sexuality is about who you're attracted to and what you do, right, with a certain person in an intimate space. Because sexuality is not the act of sex, right? That is something that we need to understand. Why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because there are any number of identities, right, which do not fall into the neat categories of heterosexuality, right, which is a man getting, attracted to a woman, or man in an active relationship with a woman, or the other way around. Okay, and why do we find these identities highly problematic? Because we look at them, or we reduce them merely to one act, which is the act of intimacy, right? The act of the intimate act that we reduce sexuality to is not sexuality. Sexuality is the sum total of your existence. It has a lot to do with the kind of food you eat, the colors you wear, the kind of texts that you relate to, the aesthetics that pleases you about the world. What do you find attractive? What do you admire? What do you enjoy? Right? What are your opinions about the world? What is your relationship with your world? All of that is part of your sexuality. Your sexuality has nothing to do with only one intimate act, right, with another person. It does not. Right? Number one. Number two, right, when you talk about heterosexual people, you don't necessarily, you don't talk about their sexuality, do you? No, you treat them like, within quotes, normal human beings, right? Yeah, but when it comes to certain identities which are queer, especially, right, gay and lesbian identities, you reduce them, right, to that one particular act, which is abominable, which is intolerable, which is abnormal, right? And that is the reason why, right, we need to look at literatures that talk about sexuality, because that is when you realize that right? Just as much as you are a being that is complete in your interaction with the world, and you are not just your partner, right? Similarly, all other kinds of identities too, right, have more to their identities than this one abominable act that you allude to them. Okay, and that is why we move on to the idea of the phenomenology of gender, which means that your sexuality is one aspect of the phenomena that defines your gender. Okay, so how, I mean, your, it could be the clothes that you wear, for example, right, the language that you use, okay, the way in which you speak, the way in which you walk, your body language, all of this goes into the formation of your gender, right? So which means that my gender is, say, I mean, I'm a cisgendered woman and I identify myself as a woman, right? I don't have a problem with the biology that is assigned to me. I don't have a problem with the gender that follows from that biology. I don't even have a problem with the sexuality, right, that is assumed to be heterosexual in me. I don't have a problem with all of these things: sex, gender, and sexuality, right? But to be this, whatever I am, right, I am interacting with various phenomena, right, and I'm appropriating various phenomena, or I'm intercepting various phenomena into my identity. So when I say Sushma, right, I'm saying I'm Hindu. When I say I'm Sushma, I'm saying that I'm, you know, I belong to a certain class, or I belong to the urban, you know, part of the world. I live in Bangalore. Okay, I belong to a certain age. Okay, and of course, then of course, details about my religion, my caste, my, you know, abilities, all of these, my qualifications, all of these are the sum total of my gender. Okay, you cannot separate the fact that I'm a woman from any of these things, right? So the whole aspect of looking at sexuality through a 360-degree lens and not reducing it to one aspect of intimate interaction with another adult is what we are looking at. Okay, so I want you to especially look at Foucault's. If you have the time, please go back and read The History of Sexuality by Foucault. It comes in different volumes. I'm talking about volume 1 here because I'm introducing the work to you here. And he actually begins, I will come back to Herculean Barbin a little later towards the end of my presentation, but I want you to look at this particular text, which is the first chapter of The History of Sexuality, which is Be Other Victorians, right? And in this chapter, Foucault talks about the whole notion of when sexuality became problematized and problematic, right? And when did sexuality or discourses of sexuality, or when did the language of sexuality become confined to one space in the house, which is the bedroom? Okay, so he says that this happened during the Victorian period. Okay, so until up to, at least in Europe, up to the 17th century, of course, I'm talking about Europe here. Okay, you realize that you know, sexuality was something that was openly discussed. Sexuality was not a taboo topic. It was not a repressed, you know, sense of shame, for example. Right. So, in fact, if you go into the, you know, the Middle languages, Middle English or Middle French, Middle European languages, you know, research reveals to us, there is significant research in this area which reveals to us that both male and female genitalia had the same terms, they had the same names. In fact, there was no difference that was made between the female and the male genitalia in the medieval period. Okay, especially up to the, when you come to Middle English or Middle French, you will see that this distinction, this overt distinction between male and female was not there in language. It was something that was gradually introduced as societies became more conscious of sexual differentiation as well as gender difference. So you remember that the Victorian period was the time when, you know, they covered up even the legs of the table. So if you had a tablecloth, it would go all the way down to the floor so that the legs would be covered. Okay, so he says this is the time, the Victorian period is the time when repression, right, took over sexuality, and sexuality became something that was not just personally repressed, but it was also repressed as a discourse. It was never narrativized, right, in the open space. It became a private affair, and it got reduced to one single act of intimacy between two consenting or non-consenting adults. Okay, so he says again, when he starts tracing the history of sexuality, he says when Freud came into the picture, right? So end of 19th century, Freud makes this big appearance. Beginning of 20th century, you have the interpretation of dreams and all that literature, which seems to bring out all discourses of sexuality, right? But Foucault says, please wait. It doesn't mean that it came out. It simply moved from one couch to the other, right? So he uses the term couch, right? So basically, the sexuality which was relegated to the couch in the, basically the bedroom, the marital bed, now has entered the psychiatrist's space, right? So you have a patient who is sleeping on the couch, and sexuality is a private narrative that is discussed between the psychiatrist and the patient, right? So with the coming on of Freud, right, although sexuality becomes important for certain discussions like psychoanalysis and psychiatry, right, it does not become open enough, right? It becomes more of a pathological condition. It becomes more of a regressive, repressive, experience that needs to be discussed. So it becomes part of the, world of counseling, of psychiatry, okay, of psychotherapy, right, rather than a public discourse. Okay, so the idea that we are looking, when we look at sexuality, we look at sex rather than sexuality as a mode of being, is what Foucault is talking about, right? And the most important contribution to my mind that Foucault has made is, this idea that sexuality is historically constituted. Your sexuality is not ahistorical. Just as your gender, your sex, your race, your caste, your religion, everything is based on the time period in which you are born, the history, the weight of history that you carry on your shoulders, or the history of the contemporary world that you belong to. So if I'm calling myself Indian, right, there is a certain historical allegiance and identity that I have embraced and appropriated to call myself an Indian, right? So I'm not just Sushma, I'm an Indian, right? And I belong to Bangalore, which has its own history, right? So just as every other aspect of your identity is historically constructed, even your sexuality is historically constructed, which means that probably if you lived in the Greek period, okay, especially during Plato's time, right, you would realize that in Plato's Republic, Plato talks about same-sex love, and it is something that was approved, and not just approved, it was something that was encouraged for young men, right? They could have multiple partners of the same sex outside of marriage. Marriage was a functional thing, right? And you see, you were allowed to, use, your sexuality was seen as your creative potential, right? So this is Plato's Republic for you, right? So based on the history to which you belong, right, your sexuality is defined. So your sexuality is not something very private. Your sexuality is not something that is, very intimate, which is what it is right now, right? But what is intimate and private has a lot to do with the larger histories that you are part of. So what is the discourse of nation and nationalism that you belong to? What is the discourse of caste or religion that you belong to? Okay, so we are going to look at certain texts later on in the presentation, where we will be looking at the whole discourse of the historical construction of sexuality. And the last important thing that I want you to look at when we look at Foucault is the idea of the genealogies of gender, right? So you see, unlike genealogy, which is your family tree, right, which is your lineage, so your great, your father, mostly it is the father's father, grandfather, unless you belong to a matrilineal or matriarchal family, you will not really look at your mother's family as your genealogy. You will always look at your father's genealogy. And that's the reason why we have our father's names, or the name of the gotra, or the name of the village, or the name of the place, or the community, or the caste, right, as our surnames, right? Whether you're male or female, you will carry your father's lineage or tradition in your name, okay? So the idea that we have this larger construction of genealogy, but all of us do not belong to this genealogy, right? We have our own genealogies, and these are your inglorious origins. Nobody will talk about it. No history textbook will record these histories, right? You will not find a history of, like, I was just listening to the last part of the presentation, previous presentation. You don't have a history of Dalit women in India. You will not find that in any history textbook. No history textbook will talk about the common man. Forget about the Dalits. Every history textbook will talk about kings and queens and people who made it big politically, who undertook large campaigns, and who, made huge conquests. So the entire notion of history is built upon the nation, and the nation is founded upon the empire. You understand? So that is a grand narrative of history. That is a genealogy to celebrate. right? So look at the Chalukyas, you look at the Cholas in Tamil Nadu, right? We look at the Wadayars of Mysore in Karnataka, for example, right? Or you look at the Mughals, you look at the, you look at Vikramaditya, Ashoka, right? So these are the histories that are given to us as genealogy, right? So the genealogy of a nation is a genealogy of empire building, right? No genealogy of history will give you the history of, say, the Dalits, for example, or the history of women. Where is the history of women? You might hear of one, Jhansi Rani Lakshmi Bai being a great warrior is not the history of women of India. And that is why we turn to literature, don't we? And that is what literature does. Literature basically retrieves all these people who have fallen into the cracks of history, right? So they are retrieved, they are taken up, they're given a voice. Okay. So you look at the genealogies of gender. Not all genders are masculine and feminine in the biological way, in the deterministic way. So there are genealogies of gender which are made to be ashamed of themselves. There are genealogies of gender which are fraught with violence. There are genealogies of gender which are based on rape, right? So if you look at the construction of nations, right, nationalisms, empires, you look at the narratives of partition of India, you will see that the narrative was the narrative of the violence, right, of men upon women, right? How many women were raped either during the Godra riots or during the communal violence that we have had across India, right? How many women have been subject to violence, right? But you will not see their histories. You will not see the histories of women, right? You will not see the histories of certain populations. You will not even see the history of common man, right? You will know that that's something very erroneous, isn't it? You will see somebody saying Shah Jahan built Taj Mahal. Did he actually build the Taj Mahal? There were like thousands of architects, hundreds of architects, thousands of laborers. They were the ones who literally built it, right? Don't you think we are incorrect when you say Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal? He did not. He got it built because he had enough money and power to do so, right? So Foucault wants you to look at the concept of not genealogy, but he wants you to look at your genealogies. All of us have our genealogies of gender, right? And these are considered to be inglorious origins, not glorious enough to enter into the larger meta narrative of history. Okay, right. So I like this quotation from Foucault. I want you to look at it. There is no escaping from power that it is always already present, constituting that very thing which one attempts to conquer it with. So if you are fighting your gender, say you have certain gender norms, or because you're a woman or you're a man, you're supposed to behave in a certain way. If you're fighting it, right, please remember that what you're fighting is the very basis of who you are, right? And that is what makes it so problematic, because gender is something that is so intrinsic to who we are, right? It is very difficult for us to redefine gender in terms of certain notions which are not normative or certain practices which are not natural. Okay, and you look at the history of the narratives of gender across the world, right? You will realize that these are all histories of resistance. These are all histories of critical questioning of what is normative. These are narratives which question the stereotypical notion of what is male or female or masculine and feminine in different ways. Okay, so I want you to look at the layout I have here in front of me. This is basically how I'm going to give you examples. To begin with, I will want you to look at the intersectionality of gender. Okay, especially in terms of history, nation, nationalism. Okay, and then we will look at certain other narratives of desire. We will look at the cyborg, which is the which is one way in which we can understand technological feminism today. I want you also to look at diaspora, queer diaspora, okay, and masculinity through Shams al-Madurai, and we will end the session with affect, right? What we mean by affect, and what is the kind of literature that has come out in the realms of queer belonging and gender fluidity. So I want you to look at three important texts, actually four important texts, but I will begin with the historical text because I want you to see the trope. Okay. Dr. Karthika, am I still audible?
Yes, ma'am. It's clear, ma'am.
Hello.
It's clear, ma'am. You can proceed. Am I audible to you, ma'am? It's clear.
Hello.
Ma'am, you can proceed, ma'am. Am I audible to you? Yes, ma'am, you're
It is
audible. I
audible.
think
Thank
there
you.
is
I
a...
thought there was some disturbance. Thank you so much. So all of you are with me. Are you all able to relate to what I'm saying? Yeah.
Ma'am, could you hear me?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I'll just go back to sharing my screen. Right. Yeah. So I want you to look at a trope, right, which is basically a set of texts historically. Okay. And I have chosen to look at the concerns of women who belong to Islamic cultures and traditions here to begin with, as an example, because this is a very important discourse that is being explored today, especially with all the Islamophobia and the kind of, uh, discourses of terrorism that we have today, which sadly they follow the same vein of white terrorism, which was started after the 9/11 attacks. Okay, so especially in the global scenario today, when we look at multiculturalism, and when we look at globalization, we look at the diasporic writing of Islamic women. Okay, and I want you to look at this because this is a very interesting example for intersectionality. And what do we mean by intersectionality? It simply means that my identity, whatever that is, it is basically a set of intersections of various identities, right? An overlapping of identities, which cannot be separated from one from the other. For example, like I said, I'm upper middle class, I'm urban, I'm middle aged, I'm highly educated, I should say, going by India's standards, in the sense that I have a postgraduate degree, I have a PhD degree, and I have had all the economic privileges of education, which a lot of women in my community do not have. Okay, so when I say I'm a woman, right, or when I say I'm urban, right, or when I say I'm Indian, all of these are not just independent identities. These are different categories which are intersecting with each other. Okay, and the ways in which the categories intersect make me who I am. So, for example, among women, probably I have a very distinctive space, in the sense that I'm in a good space as a modern day woman. I earn my own salary, I get my money, right? I have an independent existence. I have made certain life choices for myself. I've had the freedom to do that. And I was brought up by a very broad-minded parents who were not very conservative. Okay, so there are so many instances where I have been able to not be bogged down by religion or caste or something else, right? So while at the same time, for example, in relation to certain other practices, or in relation to certain other institutions, I may not be as privileged. You understand? Which means that among the women in my community, right, I may not face oppression, I may not face any kind of violence, I may not face any kind of discrimination. Okay, but say when it comes to my caste, when it comes to my religion, I'm still a woman. In relation to the men in the community, I'm still a woman, and I have undergone, different forms of discrimination as a woman, which means that the theory of intersectionality, right, leads you to understand, right, the complexity of your identity, which means that you can be privileged and oppressed at the same time. You can be privileged and oppressed at the same time. That is what we mean by intersectionality, right? The fact that your identity is constituted by different sets of overlapping, intersecting categories. Okay, that you are not one kind of identity, and therefore, when we say a woman, right, or when we talk about feminism, you cannot reduce feminism to a certain idea of feminism or one woman's experience of violence or oppression. You cannot do that. So I want you to look at one historical text by Isma Chugtai, which is Lihaf. Okay, and Lihaf is a very radical lesbian text. Okay, and interestingly, Isma Chugtai actually went to court because of this text, because she was actually talking about same-sex love between two women, that too in a Nawabi family, and this was in pre-independence Pakistan. You can imagine what I'm talking about, right? So there is Begum Jan, who was married to the Nawab, who is a poor woman, of course, but she is married to the Nawab, who is years older than her. And the Nawab is fond of young boys. He is not interested in the wife. And eventually, after a few years, Rabo, the servant, right, offers her services of massage to Begum Jan, and that is how a lesbian relationship develops between them, right? And it is very clear that in return for the sexual favors that she gets from Rabo, right, she is giving her economic favors. So this is a text which looks at the intersectionality of class and gender, okay, to begin with. And the entire narrative is narrated from the point of view of the child, right? So there is a young child narrator there. And that is what saved Imtiaz Darkar from, you know, convicted in court, right? Because what happened there was, she said, there is nothing immoral about this text. It is a text that is being narrated by a child who is, surprised at what is happening in the Nawabi family, in the household. Okay, so lihaf literally means quilt. Okay, and the child looks at this elephant, which is bobbing. The shadow of an elephant is bobbing up and down on the wall as she's sleeping during the night in Begum Jan's room, and the child is frightened. Okay, so the elephant here, the quilt, obviously, which is bobbing up and down, right, which is covering the act of Begum Jan and Rabo the servant, right? It is a metaphor for the the repressed, nature of sexuality in all our lives, whether it is heterosexual or homosexual, right? We don't really talk about sexuality. It is always covered under a quilt. And that is what lihaf means, okay? So, the text in itself is interesting, but this was something that was historically a very radical text. And it was a text, one of the first texts in pre-independence India, then to be able to talk about lesbian identities. Okay, so more than the relationship between the two women, I want you to look at the power that Begum Jan wields. It is because she belongs to an upper class Nawabi Khandan that she is able to use the services of Rabo, and she is able to effectively do this under the cover of the quilt, right? And nobody will talk about it indiscreetly because obviously she has power, right? So the notion of the intersection of, on the one hand, religion, right, the institution of marriage, and the possibility of same-sex love because of the economic position that she holds within society. Okay, so you will see that their relationship is more of a contract, right, which is based on exchange of certain services or exchange of money. Okay, so I want you to look at the raiment, the cloth, the garment there, which is the lihaf, and I want you to cross over, literally to the next century, right? I mean, not next century, maybe 5 or 6 decades later, to Imtiaz Darkar, who is writing Parda 1 and Parda 2. And who is Imtiaz Darkar? Imtiaz Darkar is a very interesting, I would say, UK-based poet. She was born in Pakistan. For part of her life, she was brought up in Mumbai, India, and then she was married into UK. Okay, and she has 2 very interesting poems. One is Parda 1 and the other one is Parda 2. Right, but I want you to look at Parda 2, which is a poem that she writes years after she wrote Parda 1, right, where she's talking about the women, right, the immigrant Muslim women who are living in the UK. Okay, and what is their relationship with the veil? What is their relationship with Parda? There are so many of me. I have meet them every day, recognize their shadows on the streets. I know their past and future. In cautious way, they place their feet. I can see behind their veils, and before they speak, I know their tongues, thick with the burr of Birmingham or Leeds. So it's a really long poem, but I want you to go back and look at it for the simple reason that, okay, these women are women who are appropriated by the larger English society that they belong to. Probably their parents or grandparents made a home out of UK. We do not know when, right, they came to India, but the fact that these women, right, have a multicultural identity which is still behind the veil. And what is the veil that we are talking about here? So although they may not wear the veil, they may not wear the burqa or the hijab, okay, which has been extremely problematized these days. They are still wearing the parda of the mind, she says. Okay, I have not quoted from that part of the text because I did not find a nice picture for it. So I want you to look at the intersection of history, multiculturalism, appropriation, and the larger discourse of heterodoxy, because these women belong not to an orthodox Muslim society, they belong to a heterodoxy, right, which requires them to be modern, which requires them to be multicultural, which requires them to assimilate to the English society. But even as they do this, they carry the memories of the warriors back home, right, with their long beards dripping in blood. Okay, I'm just quoting from the text. They carry the memory of the first time they read out from the Quran in the mosque, right? They, are constantly reminded of the fact that they may be married off back home, wherever they came from. It could be Pakistan, it could be Afghanistan, it could be the Middle East, it could even be India. So if you look at the diasporic Muslim population of women living across the world, especially in the West, right, you will see that these women wear the parda of the mind, although probably they have been relieved from the idea of the veil. Okay, so Imtiaz Darker's texts look at this kind of a complexity of femininity. So your femininity is not just, right, your womanhood, right? It is not just the fact that you have a female body and you were born into a body which was termed female, but the fact that your lived experiences are experiences of being Muslim, of belonging to the Islamic community in an English nation, right? Of belonging to a larger community which requires you to assimilate, even as back home, right, your culture is drilled into your heads. Okay, so women become not just bearers of culture, women also become transmitters of culture, because they are supposed to, probably, dress appropriately, where when they go out, probably maybe when they go to school or college, these girls dress up, wherever they are, Birmingham or Leeds, they dress up according to the demands of the larger society or the schools which they go to, or the friends or the peer group that they hang out with. But then you see when they go back home, right, you are more and more conscious that, right, you are living in a foreign country and you are Muslim, right? So I also want you to look at a very interesting, why is my slide not changing? Just a minute. I will just come back. There's some problem. I'll just try to share it again. Let me look at this one. Okay. Yeah. So I want you to look at two very contemporary writers who are in the US, but they are actually women who have emigrated from Afghanistan, more recent. Okay. So, look at their engagement with their femininity, with their identity as women. Okay. One is Lida Abdullah, and this is a poem called Kuchis. Okay. Obviously, it's a term, Afghani term, that is borrowed from native Afghanistan. Standing in the mosque then, I did not know that a couple of years later, I would become a refugee. I had lost many things, small things, marking the boundaries of my small universe. But how does one lose a country? From where does it slip one's grip? Okay, so this is a woman who has lost her country. Now she is a refugee, right, in the US. Okay, so we know that whole history of the Taliban, that whole history of emigration from all that violence, right? How people were forced to go to other countries and settle down there, right? And we know the whole history of the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks and the way in which we target certain populations because of what happened during the 9/11, right? And the Islamophobia that is surrounding, right, the whole notion of Islamic identity worldwide. Okay, so she says, I didn't know when I was standing in the mosque that in a couple of years I would become a refugee, right? But that now that I am on this side of the border, that I have lost my home, I have lost a country, I have lost many boundaries of my small universe. But how do you lose your country, right? I cannot believe that I have lost Afghanistan. I cannot believe that I am not in Afghanistan. I cannot believe that I have to make a home of this alien land in which I have been forced to become a refugee. Okay, and the other text I want you to look at is Zora Saeed, What the Scar Revealed. So again, this is written in 1998 in New York City. In an apartment overlooking a blue-gray street, her mother's veil hangs on the wall like a talisman. Her lapis doves and tinseled mountains are misplaced and glorified behind plates of glass at museums. She visits them weekly and cleans the glass between them. Okay, uh, very interesting. This is the museumization of history, right? Imagine living as an immigrant in New York, where your only contact with history is either through the mother's veil, which is hanging like a talisman upon the wall, okay, overlooking the street in an apartment, right? Or looking at all of these artifacts that are put behind plates of glass at museums, right? So she visits these museums every week, right? And she tries to clean the dust from them, right? She tries to recall the past. She tries to make sense of her own history, her own country, her own home in a land that is not hers, right? See, most of us have the luxury of, experiencing our country, our sense of nationalism, our sense of identity, national identity or regional identity, right, within our own homelands, right? Don't we? And I don't think we will know what home is until we are homeless, right? So the sense of home is something that you experience only when you are away from home. And that is why Omi Baba talks about, he says homelessness and home are not really, those are not the problems. The problems are homeliness and unhomeliness. See, you can be in your own home, but you can feel unhomely, right? Possible. You can be in another country where you are a refugee or an immigrant and you might never feel at home. Although you have made a home of that country, you might never have a sense of belonging, right? So there are two things here. One is ownership and the other one is belonging, right? So you might have the ownership of citizenship. You might be a US citizen, right? You might carry a passport, you might carry a visa, right? You might carry an ID card. You might say, okay, I'm American Afghani, or I'm American Indian, or whatever, right? But you may not feel at home there. So Baba talks about unhomeliness, right? And this is what these women feel. They feel unhomely, right? Because they have been driven apart from their homes, from their nations, right? And whatever little, history that is left with them, right, are small patches or small torn pieces of history, which they have to sew up together, right, and form an identity for themselves. Okay, so I want you to look at these particular texts because, right, you look at Islamic women's writing or you look at Islamic feminism, and from Isma Chuktai onwards, right, who's talking about sexuality, who's talking about women's role in the household, right, who is talking about women who are married off to men who are older than them and ignored, right? From that private space of the quilt, not even the bedroom, the quilt, that's a very private, intimate space. I want you to look at the questions of embodiment in parda. Again, parda has to do with a piece of cloth, right, which embodies you, which defines your gender. And here, right, the question of embodiment is the question of belonging to a space, right? So how do you embody yourself in a nation where you do not belong, to which you do not belong, right? So what is your relationship with culture as a woman when you are in a multicultural space, right? And what are the burdens of history that you carry even as you lose your nation and the nation is slipping between your fingers beyond your grip? So these are some examples I wanted you to look at, right? I want you to look at two more very interesting feminist texts, right? One is Olga Braumus, okay, who is a Greek lesbian poet, and the other one is Volga, right, who is from Andhra Pradesh, right? She's a Telugu short story writer, and I'm talking about her famous work, The Liberation of Sita. Okay, I have put these two texts together for you on the same slide or in the same way because both of them are questioning the myth of woman, right? So you look at the whole idea of womanhood, right? And you look at the whole idea of history, right, of women. You know that history has a lot to do with mythology, especially in cultures like Greece and India, right? So I do not think you can understand Indian history without looking at the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, right? So in most societies, women have mythical histories. Women are mired in myth. Women are steeped in myth. And that is precisely what both of these writers are questioning, right? So they question the idea of women's historical identities through traditional myths and popular myths. Olga Bromus, for instance, actually has revisited all the important characters in Greek mythology, all the women, right? But she has also revisited all the classical fairy tales that we know of, that children are, taught. And most of these fairy tales are about girls, if you notice, right? Whether it's Red Riding Hood or Cinderella or, except for Jack and the Beanstalk or Hansel and Gretel, most of the fairy tales are actually written about young girls. They are for young girls, right? And these young girls become young women, or they get married, they wait for the prince to appear, right? And the prince liberates them from their existence, whatever that existence is, right? So one of the things that Olga Bromus does is she rewrites, of course, she writes poetry, she rewrites these fairy tales and thereby questions all these mythical stereotypes that we have about femininity. So let me look at Red Riding Hood. Red Riding Hood is a lesbian text because in this text, Red Riding Hood is going to her grandmother's house. She's carrying a basket of goodies, and you know the classical fairy tale, right? So she ends up the grandmother's place, and she discovers that it's not her grandmother. But because she's so innocent, she's asking the wolf, right? Why are your ears so long? Why is your nose so pointed? What happened to all your teeth, Granny? And you remember that nice story that we all read as kids, okay? So this classical trope that we have of a daughter carrying a basket of goodies from her mother's house back to her grandmother's house. So that is the path that all girls have to take, right? So you have to be like your grandmother, and who will tell you that you have to be like your grandmother or her grandmother? That is your mother, right? So she will also tell you walk on the straight path, do not smell the flowers, do not get into the bushes, do not go into the woods, do not get lost in the wilderness, because there are big bad wolves there, right? And they will eat you up. So that fear is ingrained into her. That fear is, drilled and drummed into her head. And she, what does Red Riding Hood do? Very nicely, demurely covered up, right? Very nicely tucked in under the neck. She goes with a little basket, and she's a cute girl, right? Who goes all the way up to her grandmother's house without looking here and there, without smelling the flowers. And she discovers that in the bedroom, there is a big bad wolf, right? Under the blanket. Okay. And you know that the whole story of how she gets out of this whole mess, that is a different thing. But what does Olga Bromus do with her Red Riding Hood? So here Red Riding Hood, right, it's actually her addressing her mother, and she's calling her mother landscape of my heart, she says, right? How I wish I had a daughter who would come out of my body like how I came out of you, she says. That is because Olga Bromus, right, is talking about a lesbian identity here, who can never be, or who never chooses to be a mother, right? So unless she walks down the same path as her mother and grandmother, right, and reaches the bedroom, she will not be able to have a daughter, right? So you can see the analogy there, right? And the second thing is this: in this particular narrative, Red Riding Hood actually opens her basket. She says, I opened my basket in secret with other girls during the night. So you know what we are talking about, the sexual imagery and metaphor here, right? But the point here is, right, it's not so much the lesbian, it's not a lesbian text because it is erotic, or because it's talking about same-sex love. It is a lesbian text because she connects her identity with that of her mother and that of her grandmother, right? And she longs for a daughter who can continue this lineage of women. So there is the sense of collective consciousness of women. So this is a lesbian text which celebrates the lineage of women, and that is why it is a lesbian text, right? And this is a text which questions why women have to walk the straight path. Why do they have to smell why should they not smell the flowers? Because see, I went all the way dutifully, truthfully, keeping my head down. I went to my grandmother's house, and what did I find? What the wolf I escaped in the woods, I found in the, grandma's bed, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of important, interesting questions that, the author is throwing up here. I want you to look at that. But most of all, I want you to look at the idea of the lesbian triptych here. So what is a triptych? It is a combination of three individuals. It's a trope of three individuals, right? So you have the triptych of the daughter, the mother, and the grandmother in Little Red Riding Hood. And that is why she takes up this myth and she rewrites it from a lesbian point of view. Okay, so I want you to look at Volga's liberation of Sita. And this is something that I will always, I think for the longest time, it's there in all my presentations, because there is no way in which I can take this down. I'm sorry if this is repetitive for some of you, but I have to do this because Volga is this very brilliant short story writer, right, who creates a collection of short stories where Sita is in conversation with other marginal women characters from the Ramayana. So every story is a dialogue between Sita and different characters. Sita and Manthara, Sita and Shurpanaka, Sita and, Ahalya. Okay. So, and the conversations they have about Rama, about the men, about the society, about marriage. Okay. So, for instance, you have this story where she meets Shurpanaka, right? We never hear of Shurpanaka after her nose is cut off, right? I mean, she's just an undesirable woman who belongs to the, not the Kshatriya clan, but the Asura clan. I mean, she's a demibus, right? I mean, which man would want to be with her? And she dares enough to, come up to, Rama and Lakshmana and, kind of seduce them or try to, win their, friendship, right? How dare she? I mean, look at her. She's so grotesque. She's so ugly, right? How can she even, talk to us men who are, married? Okay. So obviously, what she commits is a huge crime, which is soliciting the company of a married man, and that to an Aryan, man who belongs to a superior race. She's after all an Asura, right? She belongs to the demonic clan. How can she come up to us and talk to us like this, right? And as a punishment, what happens? Her nose is cut off, and we know that her breasts are also cut off, which means that she's completely. I don't have a word for it actually. I mean, she's completely destroyed. All aspects of her femininity are destroyed. Her nose is destroyed. What is your face without your nose? And what is your body without your breasts as a woman, right? So all of these are cut off. Okay, so we don't hear from her except that she goes back to Ravana and she says, you have to take vengeance. This is what they have done to me. How can you let people do this to me? I'm your sister. Okay, so you will only see Shurpanaka up to this point of time, right? But in this particular collection of short stories, you see that Shurpanaka has gone away from the kingdom and she has actually set up her own huge garden and she tends to this garden, right? So she is disfigured. She's, according to the eyes of the society, as it is, she was ugly. She's uglier still because she doesn't have breasts and she doesn't have a nose, right? But she has created a beautiful garden out of her life, right? And Sita meets her in this garden and they talk about the war. And they talk about the fact that, all kinds of wars have been waged because men wanted to fight that war. So one of the things that people always ask is, I mean, feminists have asked this question. Why couldn't Hanuman, who went all the way to Lanka, right? He literally flew across, right, to Lanka because of the waters. And he was somebody who carried the Sanjeevani Parvat, right? The Sanjeevani Hilak, so that he could bring one herb for Lakshman, so that he could be, get back to life, so that he wouldn't die. So why couldn't Hanuman have carried Sita from Lanka back to, the forest or to Ayodhya or to her own place, which was Mithila? Why couldn't he have brought her back to safety? Why did Rama had to build the bridge? Why did Rama have to go all the way? Please remember, I'm talking about the character Rama as a literary character, and I'm looking at Ramayana as a literary text. And this is not, I'm not talking about any particular religion. Okay. So I hope you are able to make that kind of distinction. So, the question is, why couldn't Hanuman have brought Sita back? He put Lanka on fire. He could have just, in a jiffy, he could have lifted her and brought her back to Rama, right? Why did Rama have? Because it had to be Rama who rescued Sita, right? Because he had to be elevated into that position, right? Because, historically speaking, right? at that point of time in history, it was the husband who had to save the wife, right? So there are very historical roles that men played. So even as we look at Sita, you look at Rama, I don't think Rama had a very, I mean, he had to choose between Sita and the, subjects. He had to choose between Sita and the state. He had to choose between Sita and the, role that he played as the king of Ayodhya, right? And he chose to be the king of Ayodhya. We all know that. And that is why he sent Sita, right, who was pregnant with 2 children, back to the forest, right? Even after going through all those ordeals by fire, she had to go back to the forest. Okay. So the liberation of Sita is a set of short stories. And by the time you come to the end of the, collection, right, that is when Sita finds liberation, because she finds liberation in dialogue, in discussion with the other women, right, of Ramayana, right? And here there is an attempt to again build a collective consciousness of women, a sisterhood, right? I'm saying, calling this a new sisterhood, because you are going back to the old to create a new community of women. So you're allowing women to talk not just across texts, you're also allowing women to talk within texts, something which I don't think in the Ramayanas that we have had, we have done. We have not allowed Sita to talk to Shurpanaka. We haven't, right? But it's possible to do that in a feminist text. It's possible to revisit women and, take them up, bring them up from the quagmire of mythology and show them as real women who had feelings. Sita was not just the consort of Rama. She was not just somebody who accompanied him to the forest. She was not somebody who got kidnapped and had to stay with, stay in Lanka in a, for many months, resisting a man, right? And after that, you have to go through fire. And after going through fire and coming back, you're still accused of being, not maintaining fidelity with your husband, right? I mean, and you're sent back to the forest, right? So, I mean, what did Sita feel about these things? What was the what did women feel about the larger apparatus of the state, of the nation, of patriarchy, of men, of institutions like marriage, right? What did they think about being queens? Right? Did they lord it over everybody, or were they just consorts of the kings? So these are all very important questions that Olga is trying to ask, right? So I put both Olga and Volga together for you, not so that you would get this kind of a understanding of the kind of contemporary writing that is going on, right? Writings of feminism which question the very basis of the idea of being a woman, not just that, but also the loss of voice and agency. So I mean, they are literally giving agency to these women to talk, to tell their own stories, right? So I mean, I just want you to look at this particular quotation. Devoid of Sita's support, Rama tasted defeat for the first time in his life. I don't think any grand narratives will show Rama as being defeated, but Volga does that. By refusing to bow down to external authority, Sita had fully experienced for the first time the inner power of self-authority. This is obviously a translation, okay? Yeah. So this is the liberation of Sita, and Red Riding Hood, 2 examples of women revisiting the myth of woman, rewriting this myth and creating real women who are, not only in dialogue, but they are also, able to form a new sisterhood, right? A new collective consciousness, which is feminist. Okay, right. So I want you to look at the cyborg. Very interesting debate. Very scathing remark upon the history of feminism that we have had. So to begin with, Donna Haraway, in her A Cyborg Manifesto, which is an essay which is easily downloadable, you can read it, right? She is questioning every possible boundary. She's not just questioning the boundaries between male and female, feminine and masculine. She says that you have to, remove all kinds of rigid boundaries between not just human beings, but human and animal, animal and machine, right? Because these boundaries do not exist, right? So this is the beginning of feminism from the point of view of science, from the point of view of technology. So who is a cyborg? A cyborg is a hybrid being, right? Who is half human, half technology, or half gadget. All of us are cyborgs. At any given point of time, my body is attached to the laptop through a through a pair of earphones, or I'm holding a phone in my hand. If I was not here, I would be doing this, right? I would be holding my mobile phone, or I would be holding something else which is technological. So you see that most of us, right, do not just use technology. Technology has become part of our bodies now. That is why we are cyborgs. Similarly, you have the organic connection with nature. We are all animals by nature, isn't it? Right? So the idea that, we have to reject all the boundaries. So, I mean, she begins by asking this question: why should our bodies end at the skin, or include at best other beings encapsulated by skin? So why is it that as a human being you can have relationships with only other beings who are trapped in their own skins? Why can't you look at relationships beyond the human skin, beyond the bodies? Why should the body begin and end at the skin? She's asking, right? So she particularly critiques feminist identity politics, right? Uh, because she believes that women's questions are not just questions of equality with men, right? Feminism should go beyond the boundaries of male and female. So she says a rejection of rigid boundaries, notably those separating human from animal and human from machine. That is, according to her, right, a cyborg. Right? A cyborg is basically any idea or any entity which rejects these boundaries between human and animal, human and machine. Right? So this is what we popularly recognize as a post-humanist feminist theory. Right? This is post-humanist, and a lot of us are talking about post-humanism, right? So a lot of us are now looking at digital humanities. I'm sure many of you are working on digital humanities as a paper, or you have it prescribed in college, or you're doing something with it. What is digital humanities? It is based on the idea that we are not just human, that we are a combination of different identities, and what we call as the virtual world, or what we call as technology, is part of our identity. It is not different from it, right? So what is the basic tenet of Donna Haraway when she says cyborg? She's looking at affinities. So she says, I do not believe in identity. I don't think any of us has identities. We have affinities. And there is no way in which you can identify yourself other than in relation to other beings, whether it is animal or technological. And that's why you are a cyborg, right? So affinity and coalition. So she says feminism should stop talking about identity politics. Because how long will you go on talking about being a woman, being a woman, being a woman? You have to reach out. You have to make these coalitions. You have to make these affinities, right? And you have to recognize that you are not just a woman living in a society with certain value systems and standards, for example, but the fact that you are now a woman who uses technology. You live in a world which is connected at various levels, right? And your identity is a cyborg identity, right? See, I mean, I'm just sitting here in my house and I'm talking to, I think, close to 400 people. I will know, I mean, but we are still having an interaction. I mean, who would have thought of this even 1 year ago, that I would be doing a webinar with all of you, right? That is part of my identity, right? So it's important for us to look at affinities and not identities. That would be, I think, the bottom line of the cyborg. Okay, so this is one theoretical work. This is not a text in the literary sense, but this is a very significant work for feminists, for anybody who is doing feminist research, right, or anybody who's reading on feminism, right, to look at the whole politics of women and technology, women in science, and what women are doing with biology, right, and how what women are doing with the internet societies that we live in. Okay, yeah. So I think I have just 2 more slides. After that, I will be done. It's already 8:30. Oh my God. Okay, right. So I want you to look at the notion of queer diaspora, right? Remember, we talked about homeliness and unhomeliness, right? So what if you were queer? So what does queer mean? Actually, all of us are queer. Queer is anything that goes against the norm. Okay, but let's look at the, say, traditional definition of queer. So if you question either your sex or your gender or your sexuality, then you're queer. Okay. So Shyam Selvadurai is a Sri Lankan Canadian writer, right? And Funny Boy is one of his, I think, semi-autobiographical novels. I can safely say that because this is a novel about RG, who is a young boy, say about 12 years, 10 or 12 years old, who is coming of age, and as soon as he gets into adolescence, he discovers that he is gay. He is attracted to boys. Okay, and this is the same time that there is the ethnic conflict between the Sinhalese and the Tamils that is happening in Sri Lanka. And RG's ancestral house is burned down, and his parents take him to Canada. They emigrate to Canada. Okay, so RG is coming out as gay, is coupled by his exit from Sri Lanka, right? So if RG had been in Sri Lanka, I mean, the entire story, it actually ends with them emigrating to Canada, right? But the entire story is about the whole process of coming out and the difficulties of coming out, right? And the amount of problems you face in a society which does not allow you to be yourself. Okay, so RG is somebody who feels unhomely in his own house because obviously his sexual identity is not acceptable, and especially at that young age, it is definitely not acceptable in a traditional society, right? And at the same time, you see, he is his house is burned down, right? His race, right, is attacked by the opposing forces, right? So he is Sinhalese, right? And because he is Sinhalese, he is forced to emigrate, right? So you see, this whole process of diaspora, of immigration, is something that happens at two levels in this text. One is at the level of nation nationalism, at the level of emigration to Canada, at the level of the ethnic conflicts in Sri Lanka, but at the same time, it also happens at the level of the protagonist himself, who is, you know, coming out. But once he goes to Canada, Canada is a more accepting space, right? So he feels more at home in Canada. You will see that in all of Shyam Selvathurai's writing. Okay, so you know, he is more comfortable being gay in Canada than being gay back in Sri Lanka. Okay, so there is the question of the hegemonic male here, right? The hegemonic masculine, you know, identity. So what is hegemonic masculinity? It is the accepted way of being male or being a boy or being masculine, the most accepted or most preferred way, right? In any given society at any point of time, there will be a notion or ideal of hegemonic masculinity, which all men will be trying to belong to or trying to comply with or trying to attain, right? So we know that. Okay, so any identity which is masculine, which is not heterosexual, is a subordinate masculinity. It is not in alignment with hegemonic masculinity. And that is the conflict here. So this is a text which shows you the dynamics of gender in terms of ethnic conflict, in terms of dispossession, dislocation, in terms of dislocation from one's own body, right? Because you do not want to be a heterosexual boy. You know, you feel very differently. You play with the girls when you're a child. You wear your mom's sarees. You want to wear her lipstick, for instance, right? Or you want to hang out with the boys, right? And you necessarily do not have girlfriends in school. So you know, what is the sense of alienation that you experience within yourself when the society tells you you are male in a certain way, but you do not experience that masculinity in the hegemonic sense, right? So this is a very interesting text which brings up questions of masculinity. Okay. So I want you to look at two very interesting queer texts, and this is where I'm going to talk about affect. And this is, I think, my last slide, if I'm not wrong. Yes, yeah. So what is affect basically? It is a very simple thing, you know. I mean, you will be surprised to know that, you know, it has such a simple meaning. It simply means emotion. It simply means feeling. The idea that all of us are emotional beings, that we are beings with feeling, right? And whatever identities we experience, those identities, especially your gender, are closely aligned with your emotions, right? So that it might be joy, it might be despair, it might be fear. See, if you live in a homophobic society, if you are queer, if you're gay, right? Or you live in a society where, you know, questioning your biology is not acceptable, right? What happens to your sense of belonging? What happens to your sense of identity? Okay, so these are two texts which bring out these emotions. So affect, basically queer affect simply means, right, the process of, right, interiorizing your being, the process of feeling who you are, and how those feelings play a very important role in, you know, transforming your identity, right? So if you're feeling masculine or feminine, according to the theory of affect, that is not just a behavior, that's a feeling, right? Because you have been taught to feel comfortable in certain ways in a certain kind of body, right? Yeah. So I want you to look at these two poems. One is called My First Love, okay, by Joshua Jennifer Espinosa. Obviously, you know his origin. His name gives it all. My first love was silence. I built myself from scratch and no one listened. This was the best time of my life. I used to carry the clothes to the laundry room and pray for all the fog in the world to surround me. I would let my thoughts catch rides with passing aeroplanes. So, this is a poem which talks about the transition, right, that's happening in him, and how, right, uh, taking your clothes to the laundry room, you wish that you would also be covered by a fog, right? And that your clothes would disappear, and you know that you could take rides with passing airplanes and go to another world which you belong to, which is not here. Okay. Love is a word. This is Audre Lorde, obviously. Black lesbian poet, right? Wonderful poetry. I wish I could show you the whole poem, but I don't have the time. Love is a word, another kind of open. As the diamond comes into a knot of flame, I am black because I come from the earth's inside. Take my word for jewel in your open light. Do you see the intersectionality between race and gender and sexuality here? Right? So, first of all, she is black, right? And the earth's inside is black. But from the earth's inside, right, comes out a diamond, which is black, which put into flame becomes a luminous object. So she says, let my words be jewels in the open light, just as diamonds, which are disemboweled from the earth. Okay, so this is her process of coming out as black in a white man's world, as a woman in a white man's world, as queer, as lesbian in a white man's world. Okay, just as a diamond, which is a hard piece of stone, comes out from the earth and becomes a diamond. That is how she is coming out, right? And she says, right, this is an act of love, right? And this is a kind of open, and you cannot hide love, just as you cannot hide the glint of a diamond, right, when it comes out into the open. Okay, thank you. With this, I come to the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. Could you hear me,
Yeah.
ma'am?
Yes. I will just, I'm trying to come back just a minute. Yeah, I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
Yes,
ma'am.
okay. Yeah.
I'm
Right, I'm
audible,
sorry,
ma'am?
I think I've exceeded the time limit. It's 8:40 now.
It's okay, ma'am. I couldn't stop you, ma'am. I couldn't stop because it's
Sorry, I can't hear
overflowing of
you.
thoughts. And yes, that's what I'm asking. Am I audible, ma'am?
Just a minute, Dr. Karthika, I can't hear you. Sorry. Yeah, because I removed there's some problem with my earphones today, I think. Yeah. I'll see if I can just give me a minute. I will just, I will take another pair of earphones. Yeah. Yes, please go on. Sorry about that.
Oh, no issues, ma'am. It was really pleasure listening to you, ma'am. So I couldn't stop you in
Thank
between
you
to
so
take over the
much.
questions. It was completely overflowing of thoughts and ideas. It was really interesting
Okay.
and continuously listening to you and appreciating your presentation. So I could see that there are so much of questions, and I hope I couldn't take all the questions because of time constraint. I'd like to take few questions, ma'am. Shall I, ma'am? Yes.
Yeah, please, yeah.
What, according to Freudian psychoanalytical theory, female baby thinks that she is castrated?
Okay. Now that is a Freudian, notion, actually, the notion of castration. But that has been debunked by many others, neo-Freudians and modern psychoanalytical theorists. Okay. So you actually look at the at Freud's representation of the feminine. It is always in terms of the repressed. Okay, and the feminine is always defined in terms of the phallic, and you know that the phallic is extremely masculine, right? So I do not agree, like many other psychoanalysts don't agree, that the feminine, thinks of herself, or the feminine self is constituted by the idea of castration. That is definitely a myth. I don't think so. I mean, I think it has been debunked also. Yeah.
Can a woman's sexuality controlled by men?
Can it be controlled by?
Men is men.
Yeah, it has been, no? I mean, it has been controlled for a really, I mean, not men, I would say, by patriarchy, by institutions, right? Because I believe that men are also controlled, right? It's not like men are very free beings and we are controlled, or they control us, right? That's the reason why we use the term ideology or patriarchy, right? Yeah, I mean, the very idea of, if I may be permitted to talk about it, I don't know if I can talk objectively about something. See, the very idea of coitus, right, or sexuality in terms of the male. So, to a large extent, sexuality is, narrativized in terms of the male body and what the male body does to the female body, and that is why you have a whole trope of women's writing and movements. For example, you have écriture féminine, which is writing the body, isn't it? So look at all the French feminists. They are questioning this notion of pleasure, right? Or this notion of phallogocentric sexuality, right? That the language of sexuality is male, that the understanding of sexuality is in terms of the male, right? In terms of the male body. Yeah.
Yes. I will take next one. When we claim that both gender and sex constructed, aren't we trying to problematize some of the prevalent views on this issue?
Yes, the idea is to problematize, actually, right? Let me give you an example. I always give this example, but I don't know why I forgot. See, when you see the leaf of a tree, you will not see a long leaf and call it male. You will not see a round, curvaceous leaf and call it female, right? It is a leaf. All of us are made of biological matter, right? So when you call something male or female, those are categories that you assign because you want to classify, right? So we have had long histories of classification. See, you cannot do away with it. I'm not saying that it has to be done away with, that we can do away with male and female, feminine and masculine is not what I'm saying. But to be aware that it is a construction, right? So to be aware that it is biologically determined. Okay? Yeah, that is what is important.
Yeah. What is your opinion about women as enemy of women mostly shown in TV serials?
I mean, I am really sick of these. I mean, sorry, it happens at home also. My mom watches all these serials. So, I mean, I think somebody has to put an end to it, really, honestly. I will tell you how I look at this whole thing. See, women in the real world have really, they are very different. They have moved on. This is not how, women exist. One is really bad and she has a big and long bindi, right? And she's, very aggressive, and there is one lady who's extremely soft and good and nice. It doesn't work that way. We are all real people, isn't it? Right? But I think this is the fallout of I think a post-industrial society, because once women started working, women got educated, women are mostly, working, and they're also managing the family, right? So there is a sense of nostalgia. There is a sense of, because what is not real, you will try to capture it in fiction, or you will try to imagine it. So if you observe very closely, most of these TV soaps are meant for women who are housewives, or, homemakers, as we call them. So they are at home, right? So and this is the target audience. Okay, so there is this very unfair stereotype, not just stereotyping, there is a foil between the good woman and the bad woman, right? And this is definitely not true, right? So there is a market for this, and it is being commodified and sold, and I really don't know why a lot of women are still watching this. I mean, honestly, I have thought so many times that I should write something a little more powerful and, put it somewhere out there. I don't know when that's going to happen, but hopefully, I mean, I see so many of these kinds of narratives, which are not realistic. I don't have anything to say except that there is a market, and people are making millions of in India, millions of rupees out of this, right? By showing women this way. But I completely don't agree with this kind of representation of women. It's not true. It's not real. Yeah.
Point your views. How much GLBTQ are liberally accepted in our Indian society as in the Western countries?
Okay, not much. There is still a lot of homophobia around. Okay, but things are changing, I think. Um, See, it's not like in the West they are completely accepted. There is a certain amount of homophobia there also. Okay, that's what I told you, because we reduce them to certain, acts. See, we look at them only as people, who indulge in same-sex love. We don't look at them as individuals, right? Do we? Right? That is what makes it so problematic in any society. In India, I think there has been a lot of political debate, and with Section 377 being discussed elaborately, there is a lot more awareness now. It is changing, but I wouldn't say we still have a lot of catching up to do. If you're comparing it with the West, right? I think we have a lot of catching up to do. Yes.
Um, it means the concept of biological sex is also based on phenomenology, just like sexuality and gender.
Okay. Are you? The question I think is sex also a phenomenon? Yes,
Yes,
it
yes,
is.
phenomenal.
Right? Because your sex is based on your body, isn't it? Your sex is ascribed to your body, and your body is matter. It is phenomenon, right? And that is why we do things to our bodies, right? So I'm wearing a bindi. What is this? This is a symbol of femininity, right? So my body is a phenomenon. The bindi is a phenomenon which is in symbolic interaction. So the body and the bindi are in symbolic interaction. Two phenomena which are interacting so that my femininity is formed, right? So you have tattooing, you have piercing, you have, all kinds of things that people do to their bodies to express their identity today, right? Yeah. So I don't think it's possible not to interact, not to have symbols. Impossible. Because we are all symbolic beings, right? And it is in our interaction with the different phenomena, symbolically, that we become identities. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, there is a question. Culture itself creates barriers in women empowerment. What is your opinion? Culture itself creates barriers in women empowerment. What is your opinion? We want rap. Why not see?
Why not? Sorry, I didn't get the
Why not
last part.
Sita? Uh, there is a question.
Okay,
We
okay.
want
See,
Ram.
culture
Why
is
not
one
Sita?
aspect. Huh. Okay, see, culture is just one aspect. Okay. Um, See, we also need to look at the other conditions. For example, very not maybe not for me. It does not matter because I am an earning member, right? See, I see when you look at the outside world at the grassroots level, you look at manual laborers. Women are paid less than men for the same kind of work they do on construction sites, in agricultural farming, in other industries. Men get more than they earn more than women, right? Look at the political representation of women, right? How many women do you have in governance? How many women do you have in leadership positions? How many women are policy makers for the nation? Right? You might have one Nirmala Sitaraman, right? Or one or two people, right? I mean, so those questions also become important. Laws, right? We don't really, for example, we have laws to safeguard adult women, but we don't have enough laws to safeguard children from getting sexually abused. It's only now that we have started looking at child sexual abuse, isn't it? Right. So culture is one aspect, right? I think it needs to go beyond that. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Why in Ramayana and Mahabharata, women is described not major but only in minor roles?
Okay. See, I mean, that's a very difficult question to answer because, see, that way, most of the texts are patriarchal, isn't it? Right. I mean, I'm not saying it's good or bad. See, anything that I'm saying in this forum, it's not about whether something is good or bad. That's why I said you have to put it, you have to locate it in the historicity of the period. Right. So when did Rama live, or when was the text written? What were the norms of masculinity and femininity at that point of time? those would have determined the roles that were given to women, actually, right? But it's also possible that you might have a woman or female protagonist, but she might still play a minor role in the story, isn't it? Right. So just reversing the roles will not be enough. Right. Being realistic probably will be more helpful. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Still, I could see so many questions, ma'am, but it is time constraint that I have to
Yeah.
wind up the session. So I shall pass on all the questions to you, ma'am, and I will share the chat also to
Yes,
you,
yes.
ma'am.
If you can share the chat history, I will, and their email IDs, then I will definitely
Yes,
get back to all of
yes,
them.
ma'am. I will share it, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
It's real pleasure to
Yes,
listen to you,
yes.
ma'am. So I couldn't stop the question and answer session too, but I have to do that. It demands time.
No
Uh,
problem. I understand. It's really late in the night. It's dinner time.
yes,
And with all the feminism we have talked about, I mean, there are women who need to probably feed their children, take care
yes,
of their
of course, ma'am.
families, and they may have to go
Yes,
back to work tomorrow, right? All of us need a good night's
yeah,
sleep.
of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So
So it
let's
was
be
real
realistic
pleasure
about
to
it.
have you
Yeah.
here, ma'am. Yes, yes, sure, ma'am.
Thank you.
Really,
Thank you
very
so
thank you
much.
so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us your consent and being here as a guest speaker for the valedictory session. And we feel that you're the apt one to wind up our entire 1 week webinar series. So thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for being here. It's a pleasure. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
ma'am.
Okay. Nice. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Shall I leave the session now?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Good night. Bye. Bye, all of
Thank
you.
Dear participants, thank you so much. Still, we could see all the participants are in the platform. So this complete 1 week webinar series would not have been possible without your support and your encouragement. So we could see that people are asking for the overall feedback. So really, it's our pleasure for having this wonderful audiences, wonderful participants, engaging and active participants. So I should thank you for thank you all. It's really our pleasure to have you all here. And as I asked yesterday, that a few participants can give your feedbacks and present your feedbacks in front of others. So we'll just start that within 2 minutes. Each and everyone can share her feedback. And meanwhile, we will also post the overall feedback also. So participants, you can just fill the overall feedback and submit it and receive your certificates. Thank you for your participation, active participation. I shall proceed with the feedback session, please. So we have a few participants who accepted to give their feedback, present their feedback. So in that way, I would like to call Ms. Meghana, student, Marthoma College of Science and Technology, Kerala. Can I have Meghana here, please? Meghana, is Meghana there?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, please. You can just
Good
proceed
evening,
with the
ma'am.
feedback. Good evening.
Good evening to all the participants and the faculty members of Sri Parashakti College of Kutralam. Uh, I uh, I especially thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful webinar conducted since 1 week. It's nice. It's a nice webinar. It's so helpful to everyone. Even I'm studying these topics in my in 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 my degree course. I thank all the guests who have come to present the speech on feminism. Thank you, ma'am, for such a wonderful webinar. And thank you, Sushma, ma'am, for such a wonderful webinar.
Thank you so
And
much.
other guests who have come to participate to deliver a speech. Especially thanks Sushma ma'am for the wonderful webinar, ma'am. Thank you so much. I'm
Thank you.
glad to be part of this webinar, ma'am. Such a
We are
wonderful and
glad to
helpful
have you
webinar,
also.
ma'am.
Thank you. Shall I call Amanullah, research scholar from National Urdu University, Hyderabad? Uh, are you there? Are you there, or shall I proceed to the next one? Yeah, please. I couldn't find him. I think so. Is Amanullah there?
I don't think so.
Okay, fine. I'll go to the next one. Can I call Dr. Sanjay Pandit, Assistant Professor of Department of English, Yashwantrao College,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Maharashtra, to give you feedback?
Start my video. May I start my video?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can.
Wait.
So kindly please be within 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to team of your Madam Sri Parashakti College for Women, which organized this international webinar on women, gender, and literature. Really, it was a very wonderful, you can say that, intellectual feast for us. We enjoy within these 7 days many things. I explain this webinar as a rainbow because 7 colors are there, and really this webinar has filled up these 7 colors. It's my observation that in this webinar, I come to know many things about feminism, from ancient glory of feminism to the digital feminism. Even it explored many things of Indian mythological epics, mythological books like Ramayana, Mahabharata, and from keynote speaker to valedictory speaker, all the speakers, they were really, you can say that, excellent. They were expert and eminent, and whatever they have shown, whatever they have given to us, it was very wonderful. From European feminism, American feminism, African, Indian, Black feminism, Dalit feminism, minority discourse, and whatnot. Everything it is covered. So first of all, again, I very much, you can say that, thankful to you for your team, especially Kartika madam, your strict observation of each and every participant, your team, that is I forget your principal, then Rajeshwari ma'am, then Sundari ma'am, all your team. I conclude here that teamwork leads to a success. This webinar. Once again, I wish you all the best for your future, for your future plannings of, you can say that, such seminars and webinars. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to communicate with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your feedback, sharing your feedback. Thank you. Can I call Payush Shiv Yadav, UG student of ACS College, Navapur? Is he there? Okay. Fine. So if you're there in the line, kindly send me a message. I'll move on to the next participant to give the feedback. Can I call Amrin, research scholar, Department of Museology, AMU Aligarh?
No, ma'am.
Are you there? Yeah, 1 second. I'll just move to the next one. Can I call Padmavati, a research scholar from Nellamani Adva College?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can proceed.
Fantabulous evening to one and all who is attending the informative session for those 7 days. It gives me immense pleasure to the organizing committee for this international webinar series. And I would be much grateful to all that wonderful professors bringing us the extraordinary knowledge and enriching skills about feminism, women's culture, race, class in the patriarchal society. I would like to add my special gratitude towards Madam Dr. Padmashini, Madam Uttu Meena, who explore the issues of gender studies to the digital gender studies, suppressions of women, which could be much useful for my research purpose. At last, I dedicate my heartfelt thanks to Madam Dr. Kartika for her innovative idea for conducting webinar series and taking into the international level. Thank you once again, ma'am. Waiting for the next series of knowledge gaining, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Padmavati. I shall move on to the next participant's feedback. Can I call Dr. Sushila, Professor, Department of English, Jyotiraj College, Bangalore?
Yes, ma'am. Can I speak now?
Yes, ma'am. Please, ma'am.
Okay. Ma'am, due to technical glitches, I'm not able to start a video, but I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please proceed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just start with a quote. Coming together is a beginning, staying together is progress, and working together is success. A quote by Henry Ford. I profoundly thank Sri Parashakti College for Women, Kuttalam, and Department of English and Research Center for having conducted a 7-day webinar starting from 24th to as of today. It was comfortable to attend the webinar because of the timings, and it was suitable for most of the working people. And it did not clash with our online teaching or online work as today, being in the pandemic region. I think this is wonderful idea of conducting a webinar in the evenings to our convenience. This kind of webinar provided a fantastic opportunity to be enriched, and my personal opinion is all the days the resource person and the topics which they divulged was excellent, and the way it was communicated and their original thoughts in a very lucid way, it was all enjoyable. And having a topic at this kind and bringing it under one umbrella is a fantastic job. And I special thank my special thanks to Dr. Kartika for having conducted the webinar smoothly, calmly, answering to our queries, and through the question and answer session, and it reflected more of the topics. Then it also gave a voice to all women, if I may quote so. My heartfelt gratitude to the principal, organizers, and also giving an opportunity to be a part of this webinar. And thanks to the technical team, there were no glitches in all the 7 days. Very happy to be a part of this, and very happy to listen to so many sea of people talking in wonderful topics. Thank you, Kartika ma'am.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, Dr. Sushila, madam. Thank you for your feedback. I would like to call one more participant, Mr. Rintu Das, a student of PG Department, English Institution, Raigan University, West Bengal. Is he there?
No.
Not there. Okay.
Can I say a few words?
Yeah, please.
So, good evening, ma'am. This is Dr. John from Bangalore. So the 1 week, it is not easy. It is not a joke to conduct any program. So much of plan behind all this 1 week, calling them, putting in a plan, executing. And, people from Poland and different countries, they should be available, sacrificing. So all the hard work has, bear a fruit today. That's what I feel as personally as a literature student. And the topic, everything was covered, and there is so much of interactions during this lockdown, during this economical problem, we have so much, many of us, but knowledge wise, the Parashakti College was so liberal to distribute to all the participants. So in that way, I was very happy. But only one thing what I felt, right, can be improved, because it's a women gender. Maybe it is because it is a women's college, you prepared only, chose only the female speaker, because there are a lot of men also will encourage you, will support in this feminism. Because I'm very correct, if I'm not wrong, feminism is possible because of men. I think you agree with that. Because as I belong to the male gender, right? I want to make my sons in the future to respect women equally. I do that with my wife. That's a guarantee because that is the ultimate result of the whole conference. It's not only
Sure,
listening,
sure.
enjoying, appreciating. So I wish all the men in the group will respect your mom, sister, and everyone. So make sure that the feminism will disappear very soon, and they should agree that they are also treated equally in the future. So
Sure,
thank you so
sure.
much, and God
Thank
bless
you.
you,
Thank you
Karthik
so
and man.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your feedback.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm
Rintudas?
yes, ma'am. I'm
Yeah,
Rintudas.
please proceed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rintudas from Raigon University. I'm a student of PG English department. I'm really appreciating the organizing committee and the speaker person who helped us in many ways to learn much more things about feminism, women, and the parts of the women in our society, and many more things. I'm really feeling so much helped by the organizing committee and the speaker person. I want to um,
Hello, ma'am.
thankfulness for that and for elements of such fruitful webinars. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing your feedback with us. Shall I wind up, or is anybody wanted to share your feedback?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Thank you so much. I got a chance to attend this wonderful webinar, and further, you may got a chance to. I will definitely attend your webinar.
Sure.
Such a wonderful webinar.
Thank you so much.
Okay, ma'am. Bye bye. Good night, ma'am.
Good night. Thank you so much. We would like to thank all the participants for your active participation, and we are very overwhelmed with all our resource persons. So for giving their consent and being a part of a webinar, we thank all the resource persons. So to wind up formally, I have our program coordinator, S.V. Sundari, ma'am. Can I have Professor Sundari to propose a vote of thank and give an overview of the webinar?
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Yeah,
You can proceed.
Yes. A pleasant good evening to one and all gathered here. I am more honored to present the overview of this one-week international webinar series entitled Women, Gender, Literature, Core Concepts and Perspectives, hosted by the Department of English and Research Center, Sri Parashakti College for Women, Kutralam. We had 1,268 participants from across the world representing various states like Kerala, Maharashtra, West Bengal, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, etc., and countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Morocco, and United States. We had international resource persons like Professor Elisabetta Marina, University of Rome, Italy, Dr. Patricia Astin, Assistant Professor, Institute of English Studies, Poland, and Dr. Stefani Evans, Professor and Director, Institute for Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, USA. And we had erudite scholars from other states, Professor Anita Singh, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, Dr. Nandini Sen, Associate Professor, Bharati College, University of Delhi, Dr. Soumi Shanshan, St. Gregorius College, Kollam, Dr. Reshmi, Associate Professor, Pondicherry University, Pondicherry, and also we had scholars, eminent speakers from our state, Dr. Sujata Menon, Senior Assistant Professor, Shastra, deemed to be University, Tanjavur, Dr. Jayapriya, Head and Associate Professor, Mother Teresa Women's University, Kodaikanal, Dr. Ashita Verghese, Assistant Professor, Bharatiya University, Coimbatore, Dr. Banumadhi, Assistant Professor, Thiagarajar College, Madurai, Dr. Badmashini, Assistant Professor, Sri SRM College, Satur, Ms. Mutumina, Assistant Professor, Mannathiramalai Nayakar College, Madurai, and the guest speaker, Dr. Sushma V.Murthy, Associate Professor, Rice, deemed to be University, Bangalore. And I take this opportunity to thank the Secretary and the Principal, Dr. Arjana Sundari, for their logistics support and guidance. And next, I thank the HOD and convener, Mrs. A.S. Radha, and Organizing Secretary, Dr. S. Karthika, HOD, Research Center of English, and Dr. Rajeshwari, HOD SF, for arranging this webinar series. And I also thank the department members for their constant support. Next, I offer my sincere gratitude to the student coordinators, Subhaveta and Manochitra, for the technical assistance. Last but not the least, I thank the participants without whose support this webinar series would not have come to fruition. And I take this opportunity to thank all the resource persons, international and also from other states and also within Tamil Nadu, for accepting our invitation and gracing the function with and enlightening the audience with their knowledge. I hope the participants would have enriched themselves by attending this webinar series. Last but not least, I thank one and all present here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving the overview and posing the vote of thanks. So with that note, we would like to wind up the sessions, and we will be open with the platform. And from my side, I would like to record my sincere thanks to my two scholars. So without them, this webinar would not have been so much successful. So I personally thank Ms. Manochitra and Ms. Shubhaveda for their constant support in organizing the entire thing. So you could see that hosts, those two people are the host. Without having any technical issue, they are taking over this entire 7 days webinar, and especially you are receiving the certificates now, and you could have seen that brochure, everything which is being designed by these two scholars. So I sincerely record my thanks to them. Thank you so much. So thank you, participants. I hope all of you have submitted the overall feedback too. So we will be in the platform for quite some time. So if anybody is reminded it to submit it, please do that. Thank you so much.